As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
No one had questioned him about his signature on the gift certificate, but he had noticed that the men at the mills looked at him with a kind of searching curiosity, almost as if they expected to find the scars of some physical torture on his body. He felt nothing but the sense of an even, restful twilight, like a spread of slag over a molten metal when it crusts and swallows the last brilliant spurt of the white glow within. He felt nothing at the thought of the looters who were now going to manufacture Reardon metal. His desire to hold his right to it and proudly to be the only one to sell it had been his form of respect for his fellow men, his belief that to trade with them was an act of honor. The belief, the respect, and the desire were gone. He did not care what men made, what they sold, where they bought his metal, or whether any of them would know that it had been his. The human shapes moving past him in the streets of the city were physical objects without any meaning. The countryside, with the darkness washing away all traces of human activity, leaving only an untouched earth which he had once been able to handle, was real. He carried a gun in his pocket, as advised by the policemen of the radio car that patrolled the roads. They had warned him that no road was safe after dark these days. He felt, with a touch of mirthless amusement, that the gun had been needed at the mills, not in the peaceful safety of loneliness and night. What could some starving vagrant take from him compared to what had been taken by men who claimed to be his protectors? He walked with an effortless speed, feeling relaxed by a form of activity that was natural to him. This was his period of training for solitude, he thought. He had to learn to live without any awareness of people, the awareness that now paralyzed him with repulsion. He had once built his fortune, starting out with empty hands. Now he had to rebuild his life, starting out with an empty spirit. He would give himself a short span of time for the training, he thought, and then he would claim the one incomparable value still left to him, the one desire that had remained pure and whole. He would go to Dagny. 2 commandments had grown in his mind. One was a duty, the other a passionate wish. The first was never to let her learn the reason of his surrender to the looters. The second was to say to her the words which he should have known at their first meeting, and should have said on the gallery of Ellis Wyatt's house. There was nothing but the strong summer starlight to guide him as he walked, but he could distinguish the highway and the remnant of a stone fence ahead, at the corner of a country crossroad. The fence had nothing to protect any longer, only a spread of weeds, a willow tree bending over the road, and, farther in the distance, the ruin of a farmhouse with the starlight showing through its roof. He walked, thinking that even this sight still retained the power to be of value. It gave him the promise of a long stretch of space undisturbed by human intrusion. The man who stepped suddenly out into the road must have come from behind the willow tree, but so swiftly that it seemed as if he had sprung up from the middle of the highway. Reardon's hand went to the gun in his pocket, but stopped. He knew, by the proud posture of the body standing in the open, by the straight line of the shoulders against the starlit sky, that the man was not a bandit. When he heard the voice, he knew that the man was not a beggar.
So this report reads, quote, American officials say they fear that Ukraine has become casualty averse. One reason it has been cautious about pressing ahead with the counteroffensive. Almost any big push against dug-in Russian defenders protected by minefields would result in huge numbers of losses, end quote. So it's really something that they say they're fearful of this, that they're afraid, they're scared that Ukrainians don't want to just run into these minefields and get blown up. So in recent weeks, there have been multiple reports exposing the lack of concern on the U.S. and NATO side for Ukrainian lives. It's become very clear that they don't care about all the Ukrainians that are getting killed and maimed in this war. This past Thursday, the Washington Post reported that U.S. and British war games ahead of Ukraine's counteroffensive anticipated high casualties, but they envisioned that Kiev would accept the casualties as the cost of piercing through Russia's main defensive line. So, on one hand, you have the U.S. pressing Ukraine to push harder. Ukrainian officials say that they're not properly armed to do so. So this is interesting. A source within the Ukrainian General Staff, which is the Ukrainian military, told The Economist, quote, we simply don't have the resources to do the frontal attacks that the West is imploring us to do, end quote. So they're saying, we can't do it. And it's not even just casualties. It doesn't seem like there is the issue. They're saying that they don't have what they need. So as Ukraine's counteroffensive is failing, some U.S. officials are wondering if they should have listened to Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley's calls for peace talks last November. So if you remember, back in the fall, Milley called to seize the moment for peace talks after Ukraine made gains in the Kharkiv and Kherson regions, arguing that the battle lines likely won't change much in the future. According to media reports at the time, guess who was opposed to what Milley was saying? Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, the two guys who are really running Biden's foreign policy. They were against it. And this is one of those situations where you have the State Department, the so-called diplomats, much more hawkish than the military. So a U.S. official who spoke with Politico said that Milley had a point. The official said that the Biden administration may have missed a window to push for earlier talks. However, the official said that no senior officials believed backing the counteroffensive was a mistake, despite the failure and high casualty rate. So this person is stressing that, no, even though it's been a failure and all these people are dead, we don't think it was a mistake to push for it. So a delegation representing ECOWAS traveled to Niger's capital on Saturday to meet with the military junta that deposed Nigerian President Mohamed Bazoum in a July 26 coup. So a source told the Associated Press that the 2-hour discussion yielded no progress as the two sides remain far apart on the key issue. And the key issue is Bazoum. ECOWAS wants him reinstated, but the junta, which is led by General Abdurrahman Chiani, is not backing down in the face of harsh sanctions and threats of military intervention. So after the meeting on Saturday, Chiani appeared on state TV and laid out a roadmap for the country that he said would restore civilian rule within 3 years. He said the details of the plan would be worked out within the next 30 days. So that shows he has no plans to reinstate Bazoum if he's saying civilian rule is going to come back in 3 years. So the day before the meeting, ECOWAS military chiefs concluded 2 days of talks in Ghana where they discussed plans for military intervention. Abdel Fattah Musa, who's ECOWAS's commissioner for political affairs, he said that the bloc was ready to intervene when given the order. He said, quote, "We are going to go anytime the order is given. The D-Day is also decided. We've already agreed and fine-tuned what will be required for the intervention," end quote. So Chiani, the coup leader, he said on Saturday that Niger does not want war and warned against military intervention. So according to AP, he is fearful of France launching an attack, something that he expressed in the meeting with ECOWAS officials. So France, which is Niger's former colonial ruler, has about 1,500 troops in the country and has strongly backed the ECOWAS threats, more so than the United States. And what's interesting is that France is reportedly at odds with the U.S. over Washington's engagement with the junta, which included acting Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland meeting with the coup leaders. So a French official told Politico, this is an anonymous official, they said, quote, "Perhaps in order to avoid bloodshed, the U.S. was quickly keen to talk to the putschists. Maybe the better reaction should have been to put some conditions or guarantees before opening those channels," end quote. So a tanker believed to be carrying 800,000 barrels of stolen Iranian oil began unloading its cargo off the coast of Texas on Sunday, despite Iranian warnings of retaliation. So this is the Marshall Islands flagged tanker Suez Rajan, which was seized by the U.S. under the pretext of sanctions relief back in April and forced to sail to Texas instead of China. I've been covering this a lot lately because it's very important. This happened before Iran started its latest, before Iran seized 2 oil tankers, which the U.S. used as pretext to build up its military forces in the Persian Gulf. So American companies were hesitant to unload this oil over fears of Iranian reprisals in the Persian Gulf, and the IRGC has said that it will respond. So according to AP, ship tracking data showed the Suez Rajan starting a ship-to-ship transfer of its cargo to another tanker. The cargo transfer came after a bipartisan group of U.S. senators and House members urged the Biden administration to facilitate the unloading of the oil. So the U.S. seizure, I mentioned just at the end here, the context that it provoked Iran seizing oil tankers, and the U.S. has been really increasing its presence in the Persian Gulf, including by sending that 3,000 Marines and Navy sailors as part of this amphibious, strike group that just got to the Middle East recently. So this could raise tensions even more. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Iran seize another tanker or do something like that in response.
The Peter Schiff Show.
The big story of the week, I think, is the market itself. The continues decline in the major stock market averages. It was actually the 3rd consecutive losing week for the S&P and the Dow. That's the biggest losing streak since February. The NASDAQ, though, was also down for 3 consecutive weeks. That hasn't happened at all this year. The last time that happened was in December of last year. The banks also get beat up on the week, 3 weeks in a row now for the regional banks going down. And, it was 4 weeks ago that I did my podcast, where the title of my podcast was, Did the AI-Fueled NASDAQ Bubble Just Pop? So I almost nailed the very top of the market. Now, what I saw looks suspicious to me that maybe there was a top, because I've been expecting one for the reason of rising bond yields. I mean, that was what I thought was the most significant fact that stock investors were overlooking, was the carnage that I saw in the bond market and that I thought would continue. And I nailed that perfectly, because bonds were down now for the 5th consecutive week. So the 5th week in a row where bond yields have risen. And that's why now for 3 of those 5 weeks, the stock market has followed the bond market lower, which is what I thought was likely to happen. Now, I'm still very bearish on bonds. I don't think we're close to the bottom of this bear market. I think that you're going to see the dollar and bonds falling together, because the real reason that bonds are weak is because inflation is strong and going to get stronger. See, right now, people still look at the inflation data and the fact that it's stubbornly high, and the Fed is now concerned that it might re-rear its head, as if its head ever disappeared. But, they were talking about inflation coming down. It went down from 9 to 3, but now it looks like it's going back up. And so the markets are looking at the resurgence in inflation, and their conclusion is, okay, the Fed's just going to have to fight a little harder to win this battle. The fact that they can't slay this beast, this is not an indication that the Fed just has to fight harder to win. No, what we're seeing is proof that the Fed has already lost. Inflation won. The Fed can't possibly raise rates high enough to reduce inflation without crippling the economy, without creating a worse financial crisis than 2008. This fantasy, though, is still out there in the market. But at some point, the investors are going to be confronted with reality. And that reality is those days of really low inflation, they're gone. We're not going back to 2%, not even close. One of the reasons that the stock market gets saved, right? Whenever the stock market goes down because of problems in the economy, problems for earnings, well, the Fed rescues the stock market by cutting interest rates, which now pushes up stock valuations and, of course, drives more people into the stock market because they can't get any yield in the bond market. Well, that's going to blow up too. So the markets are completely ignoring what is likely to happen. And while they still are looking in the rearview mirror at a playbook that is basically obsolete, they're not doing what they should be doing. They should be buying gold when they sell treasuries. They should be selling dollars when they sell treasuries. After all, what the hell is a treasury but dollars? In fact, they're worse than dollars because they're not dollars today. They're dollars in the future. They're IOUs. They're commitments of the U.S. government to give you dollars in the distant future. Well, who knows what those things are going to be worth in the distant future? I'm not even too confident what they're going to be worth in the near future, let alone 30 years into the future. So when people really start to put the pieces together, the bottom's going to fall out of the dollar. That's going to be even worse for the bond market. And it's going to, explode the price of gold. So I talked about the fires in Maui, in Lahaina. And this is another perfect example of, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. And how, it's unintended consequences and all this, the heart, legislating from the heart and ignoring the brain. So all these houses are burned to the ground. The whole neighborhood has been decimated, right? So it's going to be very difficult for a lot of people who lived in that neighborhood, right? I mean, they've lost so much, right? And some of these people that live there may not want to deal with the hassle of rebuilding a house. They may not want to deal with this. So what happened was you had people, investors coming in, looking to buy up the properties. Say, hey, we'll buy, we'll deal with the reconstruction of the property, we'll deal with the insurance companies. I mean, but you have people coming in and they want to, make offers to buy. Now, nobody's got a gun to anybody's head, right? If somebody comes in, some real estate developer wants to start offering to buy people's property, nobody's got a gun to their head forcing them to sell. This is an option. This is like, hey, if you don't want to deal with the headaches yourself, sell it to me. I'll take that burden off your back and I'll give you a price. You could take it or leave it, right? But now the government, the politicians come in. Oh, this is terrible. These vultures are coming in here. We got to stop this. We got to make it illegal for people to come in and buy this property. Now, what they're really doing is making it illegal for the owners to sell. Why? What business is it of the government? Why do you want to limit the opportunities that people have? Because now the government wants to say, no, you shouldn't have that option. Even if you would prefer to sell, even if you're selling at a discount, because you'd rather do that. You're willing to take a discount to not have to deal with the hassle. right? Let somebody else do it. Yes, of course, you're going to sell at a discount because it's a big hassle when you buy. So there's a value there. But the government wants to say, no, the people there are too stupid, right? You homeowners that live in Lahaina, you guys are a bunch of idiots because without the government, people are going to exploit you. You're too dumb to make your own decision over what you want to do with your property. So we're going to save you from making a mistake. Trust us. We're the government. We're here to help you. There's no guns. There's no coercion here. The only coercion would be from the government trying to force people not to sell. If the government stays out of it, nobody has to sell, right? People have a choice. That's about living in a free country, right? You get to choose what you want to do. You can choose if you want to sell, or you could choose not to sell, right? Freedom of choice, right?
But this specific situation goes back to when they overthrew Gaddafi, as you were obviously referencing. He had been employing a lot of Tuaregs, which is a nomadic Arab tribe from Niger and northern Mali, in his security forces. And when Gaddafi was overthrown, they looted his armory and returned home, at which point they started new rebellions there. So that was in around 2012, with everything else going on in the world, such as the war in Syria. Basically, a bunch of Islamists swept into the conflict zone, the Islamic State in West Africa, and Al-Qaeda in the Greater Sahara, I believe, are what they call those regional branches. And so then in, I believe, 2014, the French entered the country entered Mali under what was called Operation Barkhane, in order to fight terrorism there, and also various other groups were there, including the neighboring country of Chad, what doesn't technically neighbor Mali. Anyway, Chad had its own intervention, and ECOWAS, which will come up later, also deployed troops there. So there was this large war against terrorists in Mali, and it initially went well, as these things do, and then it went very poorly. And so over 8 years of extreme violence in the region, it has eventually undermined the civil governments that were backed by the West, and the security problems led to a series of coups starting in Guinea, which is technically not a Sahel country, but it's in West Africa. And since then, the broader region has been rocked by them. I believe 6 countries have been under coup governments. Something that's interesting to note is there's a pattern of double coups in this region. So 4 of these countries had a coup, and then they placed a transitional government, and then either the same people who did the first coup or different people overthrew the coup government and then didn't even make a pretense of being in a transitional government. So as this was going on, the U.S. and France became increasingly reliant on Niger, which was the remaining civil government in the region. The U.S. built the world's largest drone base there, the Agadez drone base, that at a very expensive price tag, it hosts over 1,000 soldiers. It's a pretty nice place. And so they were increasingly reliant on Niger. And then finally, Niger had its own coup. And they don't really know how to handle this because they've already tolerated the coup regimes in all the other countries. So, they're always hypocritical, but they don't really know how to move forward because they've been moving their troops out of Mali and Burkina Faso into Niger and just became increasingly reliant on this very poor and weak country.
A big part of that, right, is in the name of fighting the jihadists that the Libya war spread to West Africa first, I guess, and further into the Sahel, further east of there later. They trained up all these soldiers and all these military forces to now fight the jihadists that they had set loose. And then it's these American-trained colonels or captains or whoever, generals, who end up doing the coups. Now, I guess my cookie cutter says that, well, if it's an American-trained military guy that does a coup, then it's probably because that's what Washington wanted. But you're saying, no, it doesn't look like that.
Here, a lot of people were led to that conclusion, which is what I would have assumed if I hadn't been following the region so closely. And
like the same old School of the Americas narrative, right?
I'm sure you saw in March that Matt Gaetz did an excellent interrogation, I should say, of General Langley, the AFRICOM commander, going over this. And he also kind of implied the same thing and didn't make it clear that these people are going against U.S. interests. So, basically, they're losing control of their pawns is what's going on because they're flagrantly irresponsible, basically.
Now, let's talk about the consequences of the coup there. You write in the article that this is a democratically elected government of Niger, quote unquote, to whatever degree. And here it's been overthrown by its own military force, or at least it's like the palace guard, but the military is staying out of it and endorses it. And then you say it's pretty clear that the public is in support of this, huh?
Yeah, that's what it would appear, though. You have to realize when they go around on the street trying to do a poll of public support, the people might be concerned that they're just looking for dissidents to beat up or that sort of thing. So, there's plenty of reasons to be quiet about a junta regime that is locking up opponents. But at the very least, we've seen a lot of demonstrations of widespread support. I would certainly say it's fair to say that they're more popular than President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria, who was elected with 36% in a highly contested election with high levels of fraud.
And, well, what about their predecessors here, though, that was elected in Niger?
He won with 55% of the vote, though his opponent claimed that, in one district, he 103% of eligible voters voted and 99% of them voted for him.
Oops.
So it's hard to say.
Yeah, well, we know how those things go. What happened when they sent Robert Kagan's wife over there?
That's actually kind of funny. They wouldn't let her meet with either Chiani, the head of the coup government, nor Bazoum, the deposed president. They just, met with her a couple of hours and then sent her on her way. So I don't think they cared much about what Vicky Newland had to say.
No, that's good. Or bad for them.
Yeah, good for them, right?
Yeah, I mean, she might call in the forces of darkness just out of personal pique, knowing her. But I guess you're saying that the new regime is trying to make it clear that we only hate the French, but not you. We can get along, and we're not just, turning to the Russians now.
They're not making it clear. Apologists for them within the U.S. military structure are trying to say that.
I see. Well, in other words, they're not giving up the contest for influence over the new government to Russia yet.
Yeah, exactly.
And how much of a threat is that really about the Russian involvement there?
Well, I would say that this is kind of one of those things where it only matters because they're playing the game. Like Niger is a relatively small percent of the world's uranium supply, but it does produce the highest grade of it. And then it has some gold. But the jihadists in the region don't really threaten the outside world. So, there's some humanitarian concerns, they don't actually care about that. But really, it's just that they are playing this game and doing a really bad job, and it's making them look like a bunch of idiots. So they kind of need some way to, and then they don't want to give up this drone base. So they kind of need some way to salvage the policy where they come out of it not looking awful and, not fleeing like they did in Afghanistan or that sort of thing. But overall, if they chose to not play, it doesn't really matter if Russia and Wagner want this to be their problem as far as things go.
Right.
Siri, what I want to start off with is I'm always interested in people who find the message of liberty fascinating and we get excited about it, and people have different reasons for reaching that point. Tell us a little bit, in a brief way, how you came to the point where you are right now in the understanding and the desire to spread that message.
Yes. Well, thank you very much indeed for that opportunity. So I was the only elected politician in the Western world to have opposed every element of the COVID lockdowns, the semi-forced vaccinations, the social distancing, all of it. And during that period, which started in 2020, and that's what the book is about, how I experienced it, I experienced the real workings of power of what you may call the deep state. So I was very much part of the mainstream conservative establishment, and I noticed that most of the people that I was working with were very willing to sacrifice individual liberties of citizens in order to remain part of the club, as it were. And I was standing there on that precipice, on that point where I had to choose. And I chose to defend the liberties that were being taken from us on an unprecedented scale. And that's what the book is about, because the thing that followed from it was that I was being expelled from all the centers of power. I was being demonized. I was being marginalized. And that is how difficult it is. That's why the story tells about much more than just all the scam elements of COVID, the untruths. It also tells a little bit about how power seems to seduce so many people into suppressing citizens and just joining the club. And I never wanted to do that. I paid the price for it, but I also wrote about it so other people can learn from it.
Well, you can see if I can get out of there and look at this immigration problem, first in a theoretical reason why maybe countries have a right, to have rules and regulations about entry into a country, and why for practical reasons this is very necessary.
Yeah, so the Netherlands, obviously being part of the terrible EU, doesn't have the right to protect its own borders anymore. And if you don't protect your own borders, you're fundamentally not a country. We've seen the influx in the Netherlands of hundreds of thousands of migrants every year. And we're talking about the Netherlands is a country of currently about 17.5 million inhabitants. So these are serious percentages, and it adds up because every year new immigrants come in, and they seriously put pressure on the social fabric of our society. And the sinister thing about it is, and that's perhaps also where the COVID story blends in with the climate change story, blends in with supranationalism, and blends in with migration. All these issues, they are part of the same mega trend, as it were, where we as as peoples forming organic communities with one another are being played out against each other by having these incredible numbers of immigration, which no society could possibly sustain, and then having rulers, mostly supranational rulers, international rulers, that step in and say, look, we're going to fix this for you. You just raise the taxes, just have more and more police control, have more and more gated communities and people not living open lives with one another. You get low trust societies, and the government, the officials, the ruling class, as it were, profits from that, because from all that insecurity and all those societal issues comes a mega state, a corporate class, a managerial class, as James Burnham would put it, that will regulate our lives up to the tiniest detail. And that's the demonic element in it. So it's not just something that, hey, look, we need to limit this because otherwise we're going to have too much crime, we're going to ruin our business and so on. It's also something that the government takes advantage of.
How were they able to shut the entire world down and change everything that we know?
Yes, well, indeed. And the funny thing, the interesting thing about that date is that it was, these policies were implemented in all our several countries. So it was definitely a coordinated thing. It was not, we had all these national press conferences and these national parliamentary debates, but ultimately the shots were called at a different level.
And they all said the same thing. They all said the same thing, exact same thing.
Literally the same thing. And they all had the translator for the deaf at these press conferences. That was also a new thing because it helped to give people the impression that a national emergency was at hand. It was all, they played on our fears in such an immoral way. It's incredible. So you asked the question, how did they do it? And I think the most important thing for people like us to understand about how the machinations of power are, how these things are actually working, is scenario planning. So what they're doing is they've got all these scenarios that they are thinking out. Like, for example, a pandemic scenario. There have been about 10 consecutive repetitions of what the world would do, when a pandemic would hit, in the case of a pandemic. And all these government officials and big corporations and journalists, they were all present at these simulations. And what happens is that across the board, you get elites, you get people in positions of power who have already a sort of general sense of what am I going to do in case A happens or in case B happens. They've got all these scenarios already in their head. Big financial crisis, an alien attack, you name it. Whatever whatever scenario, hack attack, the breakdown of the internet. What if Russia attacks Ukraine? How are we going to respond? And almost without realizing it, almost without knowing it, national elites are groomed in that way by the international nomenclatura, by the international deep state, the global deep state. And they are primed to respond in the right way.
I should like to speak to you, Mr. Reardon. The voice had the firmness, the clarity, and the special courtesy peculiar to men who are accustomed to giving orders. Go ahead, said Reardon, provided you don't intend to ask me for help or money. The man's garments were rough but efficiently trim. He wore dark trousers and a dark blue windbreaker closed tight at his throat, prolonging the lines of his long, slender figure. He wore a dark blue cap, and all that could be seen of him in the night were his hands, his face, and a patch of gold blonde hair on his temple. The hands held no weapon, only a package wrapped in burlap, the size of a carton of cigarettes. No, Mr. Reardon, he said, I don't intend to ask you for money, but to return it to you. To return money? Yes. What money? A small refund on a very large debt. Owed by you? No, not by me. It is only a token payment, but I want you to accept it as proof that if we live long enough, you and I, every dollar of that debt will be returned to you. What debt? The money that was taken from you by force. He extended the package to Reardon, flipping the burlap open. Reardon saw the starlight run like fire along a mirror-smooth surface. He knew by its weight and texture that what he held was a bar of solid gold. He looked from the bar to the man's face, but the face seemed harder and less revealing than the surface of the metal. Who are you? Asked Reardon. The friend of the friendless. Did you come here to give this to me? Yes. Do you mean that you had to stalk me at night, on a lonely road, in order not to rob me, but to hand me a bar of gold? Yes. Why? When robbery is done in open daylight by sanction of the law, as it is done today, then any act of honor or restitution has to be hidden underground. What made you think that I'd accept a gift of this kind? It is not a gift, Mr. Reardon. It is your own money. But I have one favor to ask of you. It is a request, not a condition, because there can be no such thing as conditional property. The gold is yours, so you are free to use it as you please. But I risked my life to bring it to you tonight, so I am asking, as a favor, that you save it for the future, or spend it on yourself, on nothing but your own comfort and pleasure. Do not give it away, and above all, do not put it into your business. Why? Because I don't want it to be of any benefit to anybody but you. Otherwise I will have broken an oath taken long ago, as I am breaking every rule I had set for myself by speaking to you tonight. What do you mean? I have been collecting this money for you for a long time, but I did not intend to see you or tell you about it or give it to you until much later. Then why did you? Because I couldn't stand it any longer. Stand what? I thought that I had seen everything one could see, and that there was nothing I could not stand seeing. But when they took Reardon Medal away from you, it was too much, even for me. I know that you don't need this gold at present. What you need is the justice which it represents, and the knowledge that there are men who care for justice. Struggling not to give in to an emotion which he felt rising through his bewilderment, past all his doubts, Reardon tried to study the man's face, searching for some clue to help him understand. But the face had no expression. It had not changed once while speaking. It looked as if the man had lost the capacity to feel long ago, and what remained of him were only features that seemed implacable and dead. With a shudder of astonishment, Reardon found himself thinking that it was not the face of a man, but of an avenging angel. "Why did you care?" asked Reardon. "What do I mean to you?" "Much more than you have reason to suspect. And I have a friend to whom you mean much more than you will ever learn. He would have given anything to stand by you today, but he can't come to you. So I came in his place." "What friend?" "I prefer not to name him." "Did you say that you've spent a long time collecting this money for me?" "I have collected much more than this." He pointed at the gold. "I am holding it in your name, and I will turn it over to you when the time comes. This is only a sample, as proof that it does exist. And if you reach the day when you find yourself robbed of the last of your fortune, I want you to remember that you have a large bank account waiting for you." "What account?" "If you try to think of all the money that has been taken from you by force, you will know that your account represents a considerable sum." "How did you collect it? Where did this gold come from?" "It was taken from those who robbed you." "Taken by whom?" "By me." "Who are you?" "Ragnar Daniskjold." Reardon looked at him for a long, still moment, then let the gold fall out of his hands. Daniskjold's eyes did not follow it to the ground, but remained fixed on Reardon with no change of expression. "Would you rather I were a law-abiding citizen, Mr. Reardon? If so, which law should I abide by? Directive 10-289? "Ragnar Daniskjold," said Reardon, as if he were seeing the whole of the past decade, as if he were looking at the enormity of a crime spread through 10 years and held within 2 words. "Look more carefully, Mr. Reardon. There are only 2 modes of living left to us today. To be a looter who robs disarmed victims, or to be a victim who works for the benefit of his own despoilers. I did not choose to be either. You chose to live by means of force, like the rest of them. Yes, openly, honestly, if you will."
On Sunday, Denmark and the Netherlands became the first countries to pledge that they will provide Ukraine with US-made F-16 fighter jets following formal US approval of the transfer. So Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, She said that Denmark will hopefully provide Ukraine with 19 jets over the next few years, with the final deliveries being made in 2025. So still, it's going to be a long time before Ukraine gets all these jets. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken provided the formal approval for the transfer in a letter to the Netherlands and Denmark last week. And that letter said that the F-16s can be sent when the first Ukrainian pilots complete their training, which is not expected to happen until next summer. Finally, saying who's going to send F-16s, and the training finally started. Ukrainian officials have expressed frustration with that delay. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhny has said that F-16s would help the counteroffensive, although U.S. officials privately believe that the jets won't make much of a difference due to Russia's extensive air defenses. So China on Monday hit back at the U.S., South Korea, and Japan after the leaders of the three nations accused Beijing of dangerous and aggressive behavior in the South China Sea. So Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin was asked about this statement, and he gave a very lengthy response. I read the Chinese Foreign Ministry daily press conferences pretty often, and this was a pretty hefty response that he gave, really showing how unhappy China is with all this. So I'll read some of it. He said, quote, "The trilateral summit of leaders of the U.S., Japan, and the Republic of Korea at Camp David smeared and attacked China on Taiwan and maritime issues, an act of gross interference in China's internal affairs, a deliberate attempt to sow discord between China and our neighbors, and a serious violation of norms in international relations," end quote. So Wang said that Beijing issued formal complaints to the three nations. He noted that the U.S. has said the trilateral alliance it's building with Japan and South Korea is not meant to be aimed at any nation, which is just complete nonsense. The U.S. strategy of building alliances in the region is clearly aimed at China, as the U.S. is openly, U.S. military leaders are open about the fact that they're preparing for war with China, as I often cover. So Wang said, quote, "We urge it to match its words with actions and act on its statements that the revitalization of its alliances is not targeted at China. Stop smearing China's image and harming China's interests, and stop creating division and confrontation and undermining regional peace and stability," end quote. This is an article from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So Human Rights Watch reports that Saudi border forces are systematically murdering migrants attempting to cross into the kingdom from Yemen. The group said killing refugees had become an official policy of Riyadh. So Human Rights Watch said, quote, "Saudi border guards have killed at least hundreds of Ethiopian migrants and asylum seekers who tried to cross the Yemen-Saudi border between March 2022 and June 2023. If committed as part of a Saudi government policy to murder migrants, these killings, which appear to continue, would be a crime against humanity," end quote. So the HRW report details horrific abuses by Saudi forces, including torture and murder. It reads, quote, "Saudi border guards have used explosive weapons to kill many migrants and shot other migrants at close range, including many women and children, in a widespread and systematic pattern of attacks. In some instances, Saudi border guards asked migrants what limb to shoot and then shot them at close range," end quote. So pretty just horrific stuff. And there have been other reports about this, and which Kyle covered. There was a report from the Mixed Migration Center that came out last month that said basically the same thing. The Saudis are gunning down Ethiopian migrants trying to get into the country. And this comes as the U.S. is trying to broker this policy between Israel and the Saudis, a normalization deal that would involve the U.S. giving some kind of security guarantees to Saudi Arabia. And that's just future support. The U.S. still backs Saudi Arabia very strongly. In Yemen, that war is not over. Still, thankfully, the truce is still holding relatively well. But that could spiral out of control at any time. And according to the Washington Post, the U.S. has provided Saudi border guards with training. So, these are U.S. trained death squads basically on the Saudi border killing these migrants. So U.S. Africa Command said in a press release last week that it launched an airstrike in Somalia on August 15th. According to the command, the strike was conducted in support of the U.S.-backed Mogadishu-based government, whose forces were engaged with al-Shabaab fighters on the ground. The strike was launched about 150 miles northeast of Mogadishu. AFRICOM claimed that its initial assessment found 5 al-Shabaab fighters were killed and no civilians were harmed, but we always have to keep in mind that the Pentagon is notorious for undercounting civilian casualties, especially in Somalia, where its operations are shrouded in secrecy. So the incident marks the first airstrike reported by AFRICOM in Somalia since July 20th. U.S. airstrikes in Somalia escalated toward the end of 2022 as the U.S.-backed government launched a ground offensive against al-Shabaab. So the U.S. military really hypes up the threat of al-Shabaab due to its size and al-Qaeda affiliation, but it's widely believed that the group does not have ambitions outside of Somalia. In its press release, AFRICOM was really hyping al-Shabaab up. They described the group as the largest and most kinetically active al-Qaeda network in the world, and has proved both its will and capability to attack partner and U.S. forces. So just a little background that I include, al-Shabaab was born out of a U.S.-backed Ethiopian invasion of Somalia in 2006 that toppled the Islamic Courts Union, which was a coalition of Muslim groups who briefly held power in Mogadishu after ousting CIA-backed warlords. Al-Shabaab was, the radical offshoot of the Islamic Courts Union, and the group's first recorded attack was in 2007, and it was not until 2012 that Al-Shabaab pledged loyalty to Al-Qaeda after years of fighting the U.S. and its proxies. So, it's an enemy that the U.S. created.
Why would we have biolabs in Ukraine?
We have biolabs in Ukraine because we're developing bioweapons, and those bioweapons are using all kinds of new synthetic biology and CRISPR technology and genetic engineering techniques that were not available to previous generation, and they can make frightening stuff.
A top-line consideration is whether or not you want bioweapons being developed. Are we not already in a precipitous state when it comes to global warfare? Don't we already have enough nuclear weapons to annihilate the planet many times over? Have we not recently seen the dangers of meddling in nature's domain?
The Patriot Act reopened the bioweapons arms race in 2001. The Pentagon began putting a lot of money into bioweapons. So Anthony Fauci got all the responsibility for bioweapons development. He got at that time a 68% raise from the Pentagon in order to do that work. Every bioweapon needs a vaccine, so you develop them side by side, because in 100% of the cases when you deploy a bioweapon, there's blowback. Your side also gets sick. So in order to deploy one offensively, you need a vaccine to counter it. So you need to vaccinate your team before you deploy it.
Is this one of those moments where we could step back as a species and say, are we heading in the right direction? Where you've got laboratories, where one part of the laboratory going, we're going to invent the most lethal, deadly, awful weapons to destroy the lives of innocent people abroad who we temporarily at this time don't agree with. You guys over there, come up with a vaccine for that, because it's inevitable, 100% likely in fact, that we're all going to get sick from this crazy thing. Who's funding this? You are!
We spray her with the hose, leaving us relatively dry. Relatively? Well, there's bound to be some splashback.
So those two things are developed through a field of science called gain-of-function science, where you take an infectious microbe and you amplify its infectivity, or you make it jump species, so it may kill monkeys, now you make it kill humans, and you adopt it that way. And there's all kinds of methods, and then you make it immune to antibiotics and to therapeutic drugs and to other therapies. So it's actually the inverse of medicine.
When I hear that explained, it's like if someone explained the concept of the monarchy to me now. Like, what we're going to do is we're going to get a microbe that's deadly, that's killing monkeys. Yes, and cure those monkeys, right? Because we all love monkeys. No, we're going to make it worse. Oh, poor monkeys. I've not finished yet. I make it infectious to not us and our children. Yes, us and our children. Don't worry, there's some guys over there working on a vaccine. How's it going, guys? It's going expensive. Ah! Who is it now we're supposed to be scared of? Who's scarier than these lunatics that are there doing gain-of-function research and dual research and creating these labs and then having to admit, oh, sorry, we were involved in 2014, and oh, yes, we did have biolabs. The only way you can trust them is if on day one of the war, Joe Biden had gone, listen, this is a bit mental, actually, because like Ukraine and Russia, you can see there's an escalating tension there. And I think morally we should support Ukraine because they're decent people and Russia are the aggressor in this instance. I've got to be honest, though, we provoked them in 2014. We reneged on a deal we had not to infringe on former Soviet Union territories. We've got biolabs in Ukraine we're going to be double careful of. And one of my kids has got a cracking job at Burisma. He didn't say that, did he? So now that it's all coming out, I think, you fucking liars! What is in those Ukrainian biological labs that makes them so worrisome and dangerous? And did the US assistance extend to construction and development to the biological research facilities themselves? The indisputable reality is that despite long-standing international conventions banning development of biological weapons, all large, powerful countries conduct research that, at the very least, has the capacity to be converted into biological weapons. The work conducted under the guise of defensive research can, and sometimes is, easily converted into the banned weapons themselves. Recall that according to the FBI, the 2001 anthrax attacks that terrorized the nation came from a US Army research scientist, Dr. Bruce Ivins, working at the US Army's Infectious Disease Research Lab in Fort Detrick, Maryland. The claim was that the Army army was merely conducting defensive research to find vaccines and other protections against weaponized anthrax, but to do so, the army had to create highly weaponized anthrax strains, which Ivins then unleashed as a weapon. The lesson about the severe dangers of so-called dual-use research into biological weapons was relearned over the last 2 years as a result of the COVID pandemic. While the origins of that virus have not yet been proven with dispositive evidence, though remember, fact checkers declared early on it was definitively established that it came from species jumping and that any suggestion of a lab leak was a conspiracy theory, what is certain is that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was manipulating various coronavirus strains to make them more contagious and lethal. The justification was that doing so is necessary to study how vaccines could be developed. But regardless of intent, cultivating dangerous biological strains has the capacity to kill huge numbers of people. All of this illustrates that research that is classified as defensive can easily be converted, deliberately or otherwise, into extremely destructive biological weapons. Does any of this remind you of another story? Are there some names that keep recurring? Let's go a little deeper into this. Senator Rand Paul has referred Dr. Anthony Fauci to the Justice Department for investigation into possible criminal prosecution for allegedly lying under oath to Congress about his knowledge of gain-of-function research conducted at China's Wuhan virus lab. So there you have it. Two of the most preeminent, dominant news stories of recent times appear to have peculiar and confusing elements. No wonder there's a march to censor and control independent media and the ability to communicate and discuss all facets of complicated stories like these, when continually we see stories that are first dismissed as conspiracy theories down the line become more and more demonstrably true, or at least worthy of consideration. As Glenn Greenwald demonstrated there, the story of the Wuhan lab leak went from being something that was simply dismissed to something that seems increasingly plausible. As with Tucker's conversation with RFK, biolabs was once the preserve of nut jobs like you and me, sat in our tinfoil hats, wondering about why the world seems so unfair and how certain disasters appear to benefit certain interests while annihilating life for ordinary people. But don't these laboratories give you the perfect metaphor? Irresponsible, for-profit research that advances the interests of the military-industrial complex that, if it fell into the wrong hands, could be devastating for the world. Isn't that the very kind of unchecked power that we need to stop?
All right. Talking about California. It's a place. It's not Hawaii, but California, apparently Hurricane Hillary, she's doing everything now. California drought, undeniable evidence of climate change. Update. California rain, undeniable evidence of climate change. All right, we got it. We know what y'all do. So back to what we're getting to. The Democratic senator from Hawaii, I believe his name is Brian Schatz. And he's not letting this crisis go to waste. We got to leverage this for climate change, which I would dare say, and we'll see what he says in a second, but I would dare say, when there's a tragedy and you're using that tragedy for your agenda, let alone your nefarious agenda, let alone your agenda that seems to be made up to fearmonger people, I would dare say, shame on you. Brian Schatz says, well, I think we all have to understand that severe weather events are going to get more frequent and more severe. Well, they're called severe weather events, aren't they? Hawaii is a place that has experienced volcanic eruptions and tsunamis and hurricanes and tropical storms. It's called the climate. And they have volcanoes there. It's in a tropical location. They do all those things. That's what happens. And we've had a few wildfires, but nothing that threatened a whole city, nothing that flattened a whole city. And I just think this is the new normal. Wow. Does that sound familiar? Well, it's the new normal. Cool. He is reading the script very well. Klaus, is this your handwriting? It is? Yeah. What's all this blood on it from? I don't know. And I just think this is the new normal for not just the state of Hawaii, but for the whole planet, for the whole country. So, as we contend with increasing severe weather all the time, and we're not only going to need to take action on climate, we actually need to be prepared, blah, 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 blah. We need to take action on the climate, says the good senator, where no matter what happens in the climate, it is a crisis, as we can tell. There's some conspiracies, a lot of coincidences, if you will, on the Maui wildfires that suggest maybe there's more than meets the eyes. Fire hydrants were dry. Why was the mayor and I believe the governor out of town that day, or the fire marshal was out of town? Why weren't firefighters on the streets? And there's reports that when people were trying to evacuate, they were being told it's not time to evacuate yet. Go back into the fires. Apparently schools were canceled that day and children were home. A lot of fishy things. Not to mention back in January, allegedly scientists met about turning Maui into a 15-minute city. I don't know the truth of it. I just know those are questions being asked. And the mainstream media is working in lockstep with each other to discredit all those as baseless conspiracy theories. Misinformation. Sound familiar? The number one unanswered question that I have of President Trump, and that raving Trump fans have shared with me, some of them are high-profile Trump fans, and they've shared with me, I don't understand how and why he pushed the vaccine so hard. That doesn't sit well with me. And I either want answers or I've already drawn my conclusion, which is there was corruption there. The lockdowns are coming. Who broke this news, by the way? One Alex Jones. What do the people who are trying to put you back to sleep have to say with the new wave of lockdowns and restrictions coming?
COVID is making a comeback this summer, so many of us would like to leave it in the past, but cases are once again on the rise. So when will new booster shots roll out? Ann Thompson asked the CDC director.
This summer, most Americans...
And then what they say after this is just horse crap. The Biden regime is preparing to reinstate full COVID-19 lockdowns, beginning with masking mandates for TSA and airport employees reportedly as early as mid-September. InfoWars was the first to report. A high-level TSA official reached out to InfoWars detailing a Tuesday meeting where TSA managers were informed of new memorandums and policies that would re-implement mask wearing. Great. We need that. These policies would reinstate the mask mandate for TSA and airport employees starting in mid-September. Now, you might be saying, not a problem. I don't work for the TSA. I'm not an airport employee. Doesn't affect me. Yeah, it does. And the official added that by mid-October, we're escalating. Ever seen this before? Goalposts are moving. We got to ask you to do more stuff here, people. By mid-October, mask wearing will be mandated for pilots, flight staff, passengers as well. Gotta love that. I'm sure it'll just be done on the airlines. So apparently Alex Jones had contact with this TSA official who he's close to, whistleblower. And then Alex Jones then made a call to Border Patrol person he's got an insider connection to. And the Border Patrol person said, hey, what'd you hear from the TSA guy? Alex Jones told him and said, yeah, we were just told the same thing. Now, let's hear a quick clip of Alex Jones himself. I found it interesting. Mainstream media, like here's MSN.com, like super mainstream. They're reporting on the whole, like, hey, new restrictions are coming, but there's a really deadly variant. Trust us this time, guys. We're not lying this time. It's coming. So that's why we're justifying these things. But they're like MSN.com, they're referencing Alex Jones and InfoWars on this. I love it. Like they're referencing him because he broke the story, which I think is just beautiful. They're like, hey, there is no one dumber or says more lies than Alex Jones. And by the way, here's what Alex Jones says. Here's the news, and we're going to show you. Oh, man, it's great.
Well, I'm disappointed about something going on, but I'm also not totally surprised. But the disappointment is college is starting up lockdowns and doing these mask mandates and all this nonsense. But there was one who was going to do it for 14 days. What in the world are they going to learn by putting masks on for 14 days? Other than it's a ritual to try to get people, this is my opinion, try to get people to obey. Yeah. When they say put a mask on, they're going to. And then you figure, how are they going to get these colleges to do it? But there are a couple colleges now doing it. And how are they going to get it to do it? Most of the time, there's a process of blackmail and financing, and that's how they use social media, to work with the big companies. Yeah. And if they didn't go along with them, the company would suffer. And the companies, even though they weren't strong believers in it, they did it because of the amount of control they had on the financial system. And I kept thinking, well, what's control of the universities and the physicians and all this? And they can control. If a university doesn't go along with it or their medical school doesn't go along with it, there's a lot of defunding because it's all government. Government, and so they have to go along with it. Not only could they deny or give them more trouble getting funding, there's always a threat. If you don't obey the government in government medicine, they'll decertify you. That's like taking the medical license, which they did, under COVID. Take away the license of the doctor to make a living. So it's usually by force and money. That's the intimidation. But Zero Hedge reported this morning, it's really happening. Mask mandates, contact tracing, re-implemented at colleges and offices. Yeah. That to me is so sad. And yet, I think a fair number of people, and I am just confident that we made mention of this. Watch out. This might not be the example when we're really dealing with a virus that's a threat. It looks like we were dealing with the virus being big government taking over our lives. So to me, it is disappointing. But this whole idea to put them on for a week or a month or 2 weeks, people would say, well, what good is that going to do? Is there any scientific learning from that? And I would say my bet is that there's no scientific learning. It's all political power learning is what they're practicing.
This really shows you the power. Here's how the story started. It happened a few days ago, back just before the weekend. Alex Jones, of course, reported. He said someone talked to him, a whistleblower talked to him, and told him he's coming back. And everyone laughed. Oh, Alex Jones, he's so crazy. Here he goes again, so crazy. Well, as it often happens, he ends up being right. Now we're going to play a little bit of a clip, just so you see what he said. And this.
Ladies and gentlemen, I got a call yesterday. An individual was in town, and they wanted to meet with me that I know well, and they are a high-level manager in the TSA. And I went and met with them, had a cup of coffee with them, and they said, you got to warn people. Tuesday, we got called in, the managers, and told that by the middle of September, that the new policy is being written, that this is done, they were told this is happening, this is not hypothetical, you all have to wear masks again, and so will airport employees. Then, by the middle of October, they are going to say that everyone flying has to wear a mask.
There we go.
And in the meetings, people began
to... There we go. This is what he reported. People laughed at it. They said, here he goes again. But now we're reading the headlines, and this was an article from Steve Watson via Summit News that Zero Hedge picked up saying, yep, it's happening.
I had a conversation the other day with a progressive Democrat, a strong Democrat, but a nice person, and this subject came up, and he understood, that this collusion of big business and government, corporations and pharmaceuticals, was bad. But he says, I just can't. We were talking actually about Robert RFK, and I thought he would be more open to RFK. But he said, and the whole thing was, yeah, I like that stuff, but it's just that he always into some conspiracy. They just paint one thing. If they disagree with him, and that goes along with your opening statement, the propaganda machine. Somebody says something, it's a conspiracy. But you'd think Russiagate, would have realized that they were wrong. They would say, wait, this was all conspiracy and it was all lie. But they prove it, it still doesn't do much good.
I think the biggest conspiracy theory is that there are no conspiracies. Yeah. August 20th, they released this Morris Brown College bringing back mask mandates. Effective immediately, it's reinstated its COVID-19 mandate due to reports of positive cases. It couldn't have anything to do with the fact that we're starting flu season, can it, Dr. Paul?
No,
I mean, September, just leave that up for a second. I mean, this is what happens in September. You start getting flus. I mean, anyway. So mask wearing, all students, employees required to wear face masks, physical distancing. And that came out already. This is pulled out of thin air. There's no scientific studies showing that 3 feet will keep the virus away. Large gatherings, no large gatherings, isolation and quarantine, contact tracing, symptom monitoring, regular hand washing, all of this stuff has been absolutely disproven as being effective, yet they're bringing it back again.
We have no surge capacity in the United States. It would take us many, many months to come up to that kind of standard where we could actually compete in high-end conventional warfare. And that's why people like me and others worry that if we get into a confrontation, that we cannot win because the world has changed, warfare has changed, integrated air defenses will knock virtually everything that flies out of the sky, that we will then fall back on a nuclear deterrent, a tactical nuclear weapon that says, if you keep advancing, we'll have to use a nuclear weapon. We don't want to go there because the notion that there are so-called tactical nukes, you've heard that expression?
Yes.
Oh, that's just a little nuke, so that won't precipitate a major war. The use of any nuclear weapon is going to precipitate escalation very rapidly because your opponents will assume that if they don't use their nuclear weapons, they're going to lose them. So we're living in a terrible dilemma right now. The smartest thing that we can do is end this war.
What is Russia's objective, do you?
The smartest thing we can do is end this war.
I do not rob men who are tied and gagged. I do not demand that my victims help me. I do not tell them that I am acting for their own good. I stake my life in every encounter with men, and they have a chance to match their guns and their brains against mine in fair battle. Fair. It's I against the organized strength, the guns, the planes, the battleships of 5 continents. If it's a moral judgment that you wish to pronounce, Mr. Reardon, then who is the man of higher morality? I or Wesley Mouch? I have no answer to give you, said Reardon, his voice low. Why should you be shocked, Mr. Reardon? I am merely complying with the system which my fellow men have established. If they believe that force is the proper means to deal with one another, I am giving them what they ask for. If they believe that the purpose of my life is to serve them, let them try to enforce their creed. If they believe that my mind is their property, let them come and get it. But what sort of life have you chosen? To what purpose are you giving your mind? To the cause of my love. Which is what? Justice. Served by being a pirate. By working for the day when I won't have to be a pirate any longer. Which day is that? The day when you will be free to make a profit on Reardon metal. Oh, God, said Reardon, laughing, his voice desperate. Is that your ambition? Daniskild's face did not change. It is. Do you expect to live to see that day? Yes. Don't you? No. Then what are you looking forward to, Mr. Reardon? Nothing. What are you working for? Reardon glanced at him. Why do you ask that? To make you understand why I'm not. Don't expect me ever to approve of a criminal. I don't expect it. But there are a few things I want to help you to see. Even if they're true, the things you said. Why did you choose to be a bandit? Why didn't you simply step out like... He stopped. Like Ellis Wyatt, Mr. Reardon? Like Andrew Stockton? Like your friend, Ken Danager? Yes. Would you approve of that? He stopped, shocked by his own words. The shock that came next was to see Daniskild smile. It was like seeing the first green of spring on the sculptured plains of an iceberg. Reardon realized suddenly for the first time that Daniskild's face was more than handsome, that it had the startling beauty of physical perfection. The hard, proud features, the scornful mouth of a Viking's statue. Yet he had not been aware of it, almost as if the dead sternness of the face had forbidden the impertinence of an appraisal. But the smile was brilliantly alive. I do approve of it, Mr. Reardon, but I've chosen a special mission of my own. I'm after a man whom I want to destroy. He died many centuries ago, but until the last trace of him is wiped out of men's minds, we will not have a decent world to live in. What man? Robin Hood. Reardon looked at him blankly, not understanding. He was the man who robbed the rich and gave to the poor. Well, I'm the man who robs the poor and gives to the rich. Or, to be exact, the man who robs the thieving poor and gives back to the productive rich. What in blazes do you mean? If you remember the stories you've read about me in the newspapers, before they stopped printing them, you know that I have never robbed a private ship and never taken any private property. Nor have I ever robbed a military vessel, because the purpose of a military fleet is to protect from violence the citizens who paid for it, which is the proper function of a government. But I have seized every loot carrier that came within range of my guns, every government relief ship, subsidy ship, loan ship, gift ship, every vessel with a cargo of goods taken by force from some men for the unpaid, unearned benefit of others. I seized the boats that sailed under the flag of the idea which I am fighting, the idea that need is a sacred idol requiring human sacrifices, that the need of some men is the knife of a guillotine hanging over others, that all of us must live with our work, our hopes, our plans, our efforts at the mercy of the moment when that knife will descend upon us, and that the extent of our ability is the extent of our danger, so that success will bring our heads down on the block, while failure will give us the right to pull the cord. This is the horror which Robin Hood immortalized as an ideal of righteousness. It is said that he fought against the looting rulers and returned the loot to those who had been robbed. But that is not the meaning of the legend which has survived. He is remembered not as a champion of property, but as a champion of need, not as a defender of the robbed, but as a provider of the poor. He is held to be the first man who assumed a halo of virtue by practicing charity with wealth which he did not own, by giving away goods which he had not produced, by making others pay for the luxury of his pity. He is the man who became the symbol of the idea that need, not achievement, is the source of rights, that we don't have to produce, only to want, that the earned does not belong to us, but the unearned does. He became a justification for every mediocrity who, unable to make his own living, has demanded the power to dispose of the property of his betters, by proclaiming his willingness to devote his life to his inferiors at the price of robbing his superiors. It is this foulest of creatures, the double parasite who lives on the sores of the poor and the blood of the rich, whom men have come to regard as a moral ideal. And this has brought us to a world where the more a man produces, the closer he comes to the loss of all his rights, until, if his ability is great enough, he becomes a rightless creature delivered as prey to any claimant. While in order to be placed above rights, above principles, above morality, placed where anything is permitted to him, even plunder and murder, all a man has to do is to be in need.
We have a message from Ron Paul at the top of the page, and he says Antiwar.com is a go-to news source for him. He reads it every day. He makes sure his staff reads it every day. If you ever watch his daily show, The Liberty Report, you see oftentimes him and his co-host Dan McAdams are using articles from Antiwar.com, which is really great. That's something that I'm really proud of, is that we are a resource for prominent people like Ron Paul and others. And he says in this letter that he wrote for us that when he was in Congress, he also made sure his staff read Antiwar.com every day. So listen to Ron Paul, go to antiwar.com/donate, and you can see the different ways that you can support us: credit card, PayPal, crypto, anything like that. And please help us get this fundraiser going here so we can wrap it up and focus on our work. So U.S. and Western officials speaking to the New York Times blamed Ukraine's struggling counteroffensive on Kiev's tactics, saying Ukrainian troops are too spread out. U.S. officials said that Ukraine's primary goal is to sever Russia's land bridge to Crimea, but that Ukraine has placed its troops and firepower equally along the entire front in the south and the east. So this report, which was published on Tuesday, is the latest example of the West trying to pin the blame for Ukraine's failures solely on Kiev, even though we know that it was clear that the U.S. did not believe Ukraine would have much success but pushed for this counteroffensive anyway. And recently, the Wall Street Journal reported that Western officials did not think Ukraine had enough training or equipment for the assault, but hoped that they would be able to break through anyway. They didn't think they were properly armed, properly trained, but they just hoped that they would find a hole and be able to break through. And we've seen other examples of the U.S. and, officials speaking, to the media, saying Ukraine's not using these combined arms tactics that they learned from NATO, just trying to put all the blame on the Ukrainians. And this report said that as a result of Ukraine's tactics, there are more Ukrainian troops near Bakhmut and other eastern cities than in the south near Melitopol and Zaporozhye. And the report said that the U.S. had advised Ukraine to focus on pushing towards Melitopol, which is a city in the south, and it is close to the Sea of Azov, and it's, again, they really want to break through this land bridge that goes from Crimea to the Russian mainland that they have secured there. And that map that I have in there, if you're watching the videos from Southfront, and some news about Southfront, their domain, southfront.org, has been basically taken from them. They've been targeted by the U.S. government a lot. They're under sanctions. The U.S. claims that they're Russian intelligence, which they deny. So if you want to find Southfront's maps, now you have to go to southfront.press. And they have other, daily coverage there of the war in Ukraine and other wars. So Polish President Andrzej Duda said Tuesday that Russia has been moving nuclear weapons into Belarus and said the deployment changes the security architecture of the region. So Putin said that the first Russian nukes started arriving in Belarus back in June. So according to Putin and Lukashenko, the Belarusian leader, the nukes have already been there. And they could still be moving more in, but the deployment has not so far been confirmed by the U.S. or NATO. So this is, I believe, the first time that an official from a NATO country is saying that, yeah, we've seen that there are nukes in Belarus. And so he made the comments at a joint press conference with Portugal's president, and basically just saying that the process of moving the nukes is taking place. He said, quote, "It is changing the architecture of security in our immediate neighborhood, but also of the eastern flank of NATO at the same time. So, in fact, it is changing the situation for all of the alliance," end quote. And basically what he's hinting at, what I suspect he's hinting at, is that Poland wants the U.S. to deploy nukes to Poland. That's something that Poland's Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, he said that that NATO should respond to the Russian deployment in Belarus by putting nukes in Poland. And they want to add Poland to NATO's nuclear sharing program. Duda actually said last year, which was before Putin announced he was putting nukes in Belarus, Duda said that he brought up the idea to the U.S., again, before Russia put the nukes there. This is something Poland has wanted for a while. So under NATO's nuclear sharing programs, U.S. nuclear weapons are deployed in Germany, Belgium, Italy, Turkey, and the Netherlands. There are no American nukes in countries that joined NATO after the Cold War, but that could always change, especially now as the U.S. is working to build up the alliance's eastern flank, which is what they call, Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states. And when Putin first announced that he was deploying nukes to Belarus, he compared it to the NATO nuclear sharing program, and he said that he did it in response to the British providing Ukraine with depleted uranium ammunition. So Algeria's national radio reported on Monday that France is planning a military intervention in Niger if Nigerian President Mohamed Bazoum is not reinstated by the junta that ousted him in a July 26th coup. The radio report cited a government source who said Algeria is opposed to any intervention in Niger over fears that it will destabilize the region and lead to a migrant crisis, as the disastrous U.S. and NATO intervention in Libya did. So according to this radio report, well, I'll just read what the report said. It said, quote, France is preparing to carry out its threats against the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland in Niger by carrying out a military intervention in the event that President Mohamed Bazoum is not released, end quote. So the Algerian report also said that Algeria denied a request from France to use its airspace as part of a potential Niger intervention. It said, quote, the military intervention is said to be imminent with all the military apparatus in place. Algeria, which has always rejected the use of force, has given a negative response to the French request to fly over its national territory to attack Niger. Algiers' response is firm and unequivocal, end quote.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Yep. Meanwhile, back in Kyiv, the Netherlands defense minister, fuckface who I don't know what, I can't say his name because of all this bullshit, assured in a meeting with her Ukrainian counterpart that the Netherlands will remain a loyal partner of Ukraine and will continue providing support to keep bloodying the killing fields. Oh, 2 women? If only women were in charge, there'd be peace. How's that for fucking bullshit? Oh, you liked Hillary Clinton, Samantha Power, and Susan Rice? That along with the Nobel Peace of Crap Prize winner, I don't know where he's coming from. You know, what they say that he goes both ways. If only women were in charge, they gave us the Libyan war, which we write about in detail in this Trends Journal about the disaster that's going on there. That was brought to you, the Libyan war, brought to you by Obama, Clinton, Samantha Power, Susan Rice, and that scumbag over there in France, Sarkozy. Yep. And Cameron, little clown boy in the UK. But this is bullshit if only women were in charge. You know, fuck off. Oh, you like Madeline not all that bright? When she was asked by Leslie Stahl if the price of 500,000 children that was slaughtered because of Bill Clinton with his sanctions on Iraq was worth the price. Yes, it is. Anyway, that's the crap going on. We got imbeciles and morons running the show. Anybody, all you people at the international support for Ukraine, go the fuck over there. Go fight. Send your fucking money or shut your fucking mouth. Oh, calm down, Salenti. Oh, yeah, I'll calm down. We are on the verge of nuclear annihilation. You like World War II? He met with South Korea and Japan to increase the military support against China. We have maniacs in charge. You ready? You didn't read this anywhere because it was in Russia Today. Nuclear war is imminent, North Korea. The world is just a step away from nuclear conflict, North Korean Defense Minister General Kang Song-nam said in a statement made Tuesday. All right? No peace. No peace. Just a bunch of pieces of shit. And by the way, if you're not angry, you're fucked up. If you're not angry, you're fucked up. To see what these people are doing to us. The roads are fucking rotted. The whole country's rotting in front of us. You bet I'm angry. I don't like people stealing my money, and I don't like my money going to killing other people. Maybe you little clowns out there that vote Democrat and Repulsivekins, you really go for that.
Lord, my head's been hurting, my back's been aching, the water's drying up, there's a war in the making, people eating bugs cause they won't eat bacon, doggone it. There's needles in the streets for surviving on sidewalks next to highways full of cars self-driving. The poor keep hurting, the rich keep thriving. Doggone it. There's a little town somewhere, the only thing you hear at night is that old mill humming. The only time traffic backs up is when that old sweet Norfolk Southern trains are humming. Oh, y'all help me with this part. With me and the dog on it. Just me and the dog on it. Now people's crying about burning coal, but not the poor souls who's digging it. I reckon there's been many good men in the grave trying to keep our houses lit. Down in the oil fields and the pipelines and the linemen and the coal mines, so we can sit at home and plug in our newfangled bullshit. And Republicans and Democrats, Lord, I swear they're all just full of crap. I ain't never seen a good city slipping bureaucrat. There's a little town somewhere, the only thing you hear at night is that old mill humming. The only time traffic backs up is when that old sweet Norfolk Southern trains are humming. With me and a dog on it. Just me and a dog on it. Lord, my head's been hurting, my back's been aching, the water's drying up, there's a war in the making, people eating bugs cause they won't eat bacon. Doggone it.
Existing home sales went down now about 16%. Yeah, your mortgage rates now are about over 7%. That was for July, they went down. So this thing is there's not going to be a housing crash. Unless, of course, there's a nuclear war, then everything crashes, which is, we don't stop it, it's going to happen. It should be a warning us. And we've been going over this over and over. But there's the office building bust. And here you have it in your Trends Journal. Debt bomb, higher interest rates leave U.S. government no good options. July retail sales. Yeah, they're better than expected, but really? Mortgage rates hit their highest in 21 years. High interest rates, windfall for savers. And we go on to say about the office building bust. I was saying that the 20th century was the American century and the 21st century was the Chinese century. I always say never call anybody a futurist because there are too many wild cards. You can't predict the future. The wild card was the COVID war that China began in celebration of its Chinese Lunar New Year, the year of the rat in 2020, that's destroyed their economy and the global economy in so many different ways. China's not coming back for a while. I said that the reason China was going up because the business of China's business and the business of America has been war. And China's been investing trillions in their infrastructure. We got a rotted infrastructure and on and on. But now China's business got to war, the COVID war. And the war destroyed their economy. This is big. And there's going to be a lot of implications about it. But it's not only the Chinese economy is going down. The global economy is going down big, hard, and it's going to be fast. And it's going to happen after the summertime. I'm angry? You bet I'm angry. I am a trend forecaster. And I see where things are going. And it is, Once upon a time, there was a thing called the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happiness, go fuck yourself. I'm the little bastard bitch of a mayor, governor, senator, president, or anything. Close down your fucking life and fight the COVID war. Happiness is gone. They've sucked the joy out of life. Oh, by the way, COVID's coming back. Look at our cover. Not too long ago. Yep. Well, this is only August 11th. COVID alert. Prostitutes selling more fear and hysteria. No wonder why the kids are so fucked up. Look what they did to them. You can't go out and play. You can't go out and play. Get off that swing. Don't go swimming. Stay in your house. Can't go to school. Can't go play with your friends. No parties. Wonder why they were so fucked up.
Mr. Gosling said the agreement announced on Thursday, which was finalised in December, was a small token in the right direction. What is this? Like Monopoly? Yes, we acknowledge that you did fund that whole vaccine and we could never have invented it without you and that you gave us all of the money and we took all the profits. And in order to acknowledge that, where is it? Hold on, let me spot it. Use this microscope. There it is. Let me get some tweezers. There you go. A small token. We used these microscopes when we was coming up with a vaccine. Or when you came up with a vaccine. I can't remember anymore. It's so confusing. Chris Ridley, a Moderna spokesman, said in a statement that the company and the government have been engaged in productive discussions since 2020 regarding the licensing of certain patent related to COVID-19 vaccines. Well, I'll tell you what the rest of us have been involved in since 2020. A terrible, terrible economic disaster, a mental health crisis, and a global nightmare. They've been having productive discussions. How about some of that money back? No, I could offer you another small token. Where is that small token? He added, it was always our intention to reach an agreement, and we were pleased to have done so this past December. Oh, you lovely guys. They always intended to. We didn't intend to just make a massive profit and then give you a small token. The company has forecast COVID vaccine sales of $5 billion for 2023. A great time to be working for Moderna. That's why so many government officials that did work for the government are now working for Moderna. In fact, by a weird coincidence, Jonathan Van Tam, whose name is too much like Jean-Claude Van Damme and Jonathan Van Ness's names, he was in charge of part of the COVID response in our country, the UK, during the pandemic. Guess where he's just got a job? You're going to love this. Meanwhile, Sir Jonathan Van Tam, it's almost like the establishment are all working together to reify and make people seem real reliable and efficient and better than you, while they're 1 minute working for the government and the next minute working for Moderna, but they're better than you, remember? You don't have a Sir in front of your name. I can't afford a Sir in front of my name. Sorry, I didn't hear that. You sound like someone in need of a token. So Jonathan Van Tam, the UK's former Deputy Chief Medical Officer who became a household name during the pandemic, has become a senior medical consultant to the COVID-19 vaccine maker Moderna. That's the sort of thing you don't want happening. Imagining if at the beginning of the pandemic when people say, listen you lot, this is our World War II, why don't you all just join in? That's not patriotic. Listen, we should be shaming those people. Imagine you said then, what if high-level government officials that are involved in the recommendation of these medical solutions then take jobs? Well, that won't happen, you idiot, you conspiracy theorist. It is happening though. It is. It actually is happening. Jonathan Van Tam, whose name suggests he lives somewhere between an action star and a type of biscuit, has just been given a job at Moderna when the whole way through the pandemic, guess what he was saying? You know what the answer to this is? Moderna. Known by the initials JVT. Oh cool, he's got a nickname. That makes all the corruption just melt away. As long as we're getting shafted by people that have got cool initials, I love it. Anthony Fauci, hey, AF's on the way to F you up the BH. He was remembered by the striking metaphors he used during Downing Street briefings on the progress of the virus. Perhaps now he'll be remembered for the striking doctors and nurses who suddenly aren't as popular as they were during the pandemic. Do you remember the rainbows in the window? Do you remember the clapping for carers? It seems like with all that money being made, none of it seems to be trickling down towards doctors and nurses. That's strange, isn't it? He took up the role as part-time clinical advisor to the American biotechnology company on the 2nd of May. Van Tam, a professor who was knighted in the 2022 New Year's honours. Oh, like that is exactly how it works. Isn't it exactly how you believe it works? Okay, Jonathan Van Tam, or JVT as we call you. Arise, Sir JVT. Well done with your fantastic work. And if this knighthood isn't enough, here's a job at Moderna. What about the rest of the country? My small business collapsed. Tokens, anyone? Was a member of the government's vaccine task force during the pandemic, which made decisions on supply contracts for COVID jabs and investments in manufacturing and clinical opportunities. Oh wow, so during the pandemic, it was up to him to decide who to give your money to, and then after the pandemic, he got a job at one of the companies they gave your money to. I'm gonna need a pretty big token, baby! The UK government bought tens of millions of COVID jabs from Moderna during the pandemic and struck a 10-year partnership with the US drug maker to boost research and development of mRNA vaccines in the UK, including constructing a new vaccine factory. There's a point where I would have thought the legacy media, who used to investigate stories like this, used to be proud of their investigations into financial corruption and the relationship between the state and big corporations, might have to say, oh no, that COVID thing, it was what the conspiracy theorists said it was. It was a racket. It was opportunism.
to use a JVT-style metaphor, we took our eye off the ball and we've been shafted right up the shitter.
Don't tear the pants out of it.
When are they going to start looking into this as ordinary standard corruption, the kind of corruption that those kind of newspapers used to investigate? Moderna's chief medical officer, Paul Burton, said, Professor Van Tam's significant experience and expertise as a specialist in influenza, more like it, including its epidemiology, transmission, vaccinology, and pandemic preparedness, although many people say that one of the main problems is we prepared for an influenza pandemic rather than what this was, which was a different type of pandemic, though it was very profitable for old Van Tam. As well as a globally renowned academic and educator, will be a vital asset to Moderna as we work to improve population health security. Yeah, and possibly relationships with the government. And Moderna, working at government, profiting from your money. I mean, the whole thing is literally exactly what we thought it would be all along, except perhaps, actually, a bit worse. Just remember some of the stations of the cross on this journey to your awakening. Remember the moment where the mainstream media said people that were cynical about vaccines should be shamed. Just remember the moments when people were getting Pfizer tattooed on their bodies. Just remember the moments when Anthony Fauci was held up as if he'd scored a Super Bowl touchdown in the last few seconds of the game. Just contemplate for a moment where that $400 million that the NIH again might actually end up. Do you reckon that money's going to benefit you in some way? Think for a second about the biolabs across Ukraine and how they're funded and where that money's going and what could happen if it falls into Russian hands. And think for a moment if you can trust a single thing they tell you ever.
I just want to talk for a second or two on what they're not going to be probably talking about. You know, and my prediction is that there won't be a whole lot of talk about the Federal Reserve. I don't think they're going to be talking much about that. I think if they talk about foreign policy, it will only be to reinforce our interventionist foreign policy. I don't think we're going to hear too much new and different and present an American foreign policy of, you know, getting out of these international agreements to go to war at the will of the president and the United Nations and NATO. I don't think that's going to happen. So there's going to be a lot of things that they'll talk about, I'm sure, but you know, it's this is pretty what is disgusting about these debates. When they each get a chance to answer the question, they each have 60 seconds, and they better wrap it down fast, or I guess they're going to talk for 2 hours. The 2 hours will be up. So I don't see there's too much you know, serious talk under that. So that means if there's a little interview on another station, there's probably going to be a lot more serious talking about the issues,
or at least entertaining. Well, you can be sure that these candidates have spent hours with coaches and prep people, you know, practicing, getting ready, doing mock debates. Now, what was it like for you? What was your team of people like doing a prep for your mock debate and all this when you were on a debate? Did you spend hours on questions? And
no, I didn't, because I figured it would. I wanted to be spontaneous because I had looked at issues for a long time and I knew my position. So I didn't want somebody coming, and there were quite a few requests. You sit down, we got to, you know, tell you what's going on. I tell you what issues, what they might ask you, this sort of thing. Well, I'll deal with it when I see it, because it was just an additional bunch of information that if I try to, you know, work it into what I already think about the issue, I thought I'd be more confused than helped. So I didn't do that, and some people criticized me for it, but
I think it kind of worked out in the end. And it says McDaniel says she is excited despite lack of Trump. That is really interesting. Go to the next one. Here are the 8 people that some of America will be watching tonight. Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Tim Scott, Doug Burgum, and Asa Hutchinson. And as for Trump, if you go to the next one, Trump announced his plans for tonight on his own social network. My interview with Tucker Carlson will be aired tonight at 9 p.m. Sparks will fly. Enjoy. So it's kind of an interesting showdown between these 8. And Trump saying, hey, I'm going to have my own show at the same time.
I bet Trump ends up with more time.
Yeah, more time.
But it'll be interesting. I think the most interesting thing will be how the competition is on the size of the audience. You know, and you already said you'd probably prefer listening to Trump in that interview. But the other will be you even if somebody had something to say seriously, what can you get out in 60 seconds if you're talking about what should we do in the different places? Of course, there were times when I could summarize what I should do overseas with foreign policy. So some of the more serious things can be simplified. Is when you're an interventionist and you believe in intervention, and what you're looking for is balance and like the Fed. The Fed could do this week, and they do something next week, and they ought to have that. So it's endless. And then when it comes to welfareism and taking care of everybody, it's the interventionism, the ability to start managing things. And people, I think their argument is, I can manage it better than you can manage argument yet. There's not enough talk, as far as I'm concerned, of do we need this thing? Do we need all this stuff? And I think the biggest challenge that anybody that takes our position is being able to have the time to say, yes, I don't believe in such and such federal insurance on so and so. Oh, that's horrible. But maybe the market can handle something better, you know. But you don't have time to explain, you know, the downside, because the conventional wisdom is government has to do it,
especially overseas. I would even say I would put Ramaswamy in that category, although he's a more thoughtful, realist interventionist, and certainly less so than the others. But I suspect what's going to happen is it's going to be a beat-up party against Ramaswamy, because he's come out and said a couple of more or less reasonable things. I was just reading a piece in Newsweek where he was hammered for saying, I would freeze the current lines of control and would leave parts of the Donbass region with Russia. I would also further make a commitment that NATO would not admit Ukraine. And for that he was pilloried. James Stavridis, a former admiral, I think he was, or something like that, was talking about this is appeasement like Hitler. But, you know, despite the fact that there are a lot of problems with that, he's the only one saying, you know, we need to step back from World War III. And I think that's going to make him a punching bag, certainly for Chris Christie, and probably for Mike Pence, and maybe to a degree for DeSantis, who's also very interventionist and very much a neocon.
See, this commitment, the little bit of talk about, you know, the commitment, and he being a little bit different. To me, the thing is, if they talk about these technicalities and go along with it, they really ought to be talking about who started the war, who's responsible. You know, what's NATO's position? What should we do? And the American average voter, and you know, fortunately, more and more Americans are saying, what are we doing it for? And they just need a lot of that. But if they finally get to the Republicans, and the Republicans are, you know, even at times a little less hawkish than the Democrats, and all it is how soon do we drop the bombs, you know, and what do we do, and who's going to get blamed? Do they ever really talk about the basic? Why do we go to war with the people not having a part in the decision, like voting to go to war? I mean, they say, oh, well, this isn't real war. I mean, it's just a police action and that kind of nonsense. So that's the real problem. Is it's tough getting out. We don't know how to get out. It takes 10 to 20 years to get out of some of these wars, and yet they spend about 10 minutes behind the scenes, you know, starting a war, and that's usually done in secret.
Do you wonder why the world is collapsing around us? That is what I am fighting, Mr. Reardon. Until men learn that of all human symbols, Robin Hood is the most immoral and the most contemptible, there will be no justice on earth, and no way for mankind to survive. Reardon listened, feeling numb. But under the numbness, like the first thrust of a seed breaking through, he felt an emotion he could not identify except that it seemed familiar and very distant, like something experienced and renounced long ago. What I actually am, Mr. Reardon, is a policeman. It is a policeman's duty to protect men from criminals, criminals being those who seize wealth by force. It is a policeman's duty to retrieve stolen property and return it to its owners. But when robbery becomes the purpose of the law, and the policeman's duty becomes not the protection, but the plunder of property, then it is an outlaw who has to become a policeman. I have been selling the cargoes I retrieved to some special customers of mine in this country who pay me in gold. Also, I have been selling my cargoes to the smugglers and the black market traders of the people's states of Europe. Do you know the conditions of existence in those people's states? Since production and trade, not violence, were decreed to be crimes, the best men of Europe had no choice but to become criminals. The slave drivers of those states are kept in power by the handouts from their fellow looters in countries not yet fully drained, such as this country. I do not let the handouts reach them. I sell the goods to Europe's lawbreakers at the highest prices I can get, and I make them pay me in gold. Gold is the objective value, the means of preserving one's wealth and one's future. Nobody is permitted to have gold in Europe except the whip-wielding friends of humanity, who claim that they spend it for the welfare of their victims. That is the gold which my smuggler customers obtain to pay me. How? By the same method I use to obtain the goods. And then I return the gold to those from whom the goods were stolen. To you, Mr. Reardon, and to other men like you. Reardon grasped the nature of the emotion he had forgotten. It was the emotion he had felt when, at the age of 14, he had looked at his first paycheck, when at the age of 24 he had been made superintendent of the ore mines, when as the owner of the mines he had placed in his own name his first order for new equipment from the best concern of the time, 20th Century Motors, an emotion of solemn, joyous excitement, the sense of winning his place in a world he respected and earning the recognition of men he admired. For almost 2 decades, that emotion had been buried under a mount of wreckage, as the years had added layer upon gray layer of contempt, of indignation, of his struggle not to look around him, not to see those he dealt with, not to expect anything from men, and to keep, as a private vision within the 4 walls of his office, the sense of that world into which he had hoped to rise. Yet there it was again, breaking through from under the wreckage, that feeling of quickened interest, of listening to the luminous voice of reason with which one could communicate and deal and live. But it was the voice of a pirate speaking about acts of violence, offering him this substitute for his world of reason and justice. He could not accept it. He could not lose whatever remnant of his vision he still retained. He listened, wishing he could escape, yet knowing that he would not miss a word of it. I deposit the gold in a bank, in a gold standard bank, Mr. Reardon, to the account of men who are its rightful owners. They are the men of superlative ability who made their fortunes by personal effort, in free trade, using no compulsion, no help from the government. They are the great victims who have contributed the most and suffered the worst injustice in return. Their names are written in my book of restitution. Every load of gold which I bring back is divided among them and deposited to their accounts. Who are they? You are one of them, Mr. Reardon. I cannot compute all the money that has been extorted from you. In hidden taxes, in regulations, in wasted time, in lost effort, in energy spent to overcome artificial obstacles. I cannot compute the sum, but if you wish to see its magnitude, look around you. The extent of the misery now spreading through this once prosperous country is the extent of the injustice which you have suffered. If men refuse to pay the debt they owe you, this is the manner in which they will pay for it. But there is one part of the debt which is computed and on record. That is the part which I have made it my purpose to collect and return to you. What is that? Your income tax, Mr. Reardon. What? Your income tax for the last 12 years. You intend to refund that? In full and in gold, Mr. Reardon. Reardon burst out laughing. He laughed like a young boy in simple amusement, in enjoyment of the incredible. Good God! You're a policeman and a collector of internal revenue, too. Yes, said Daniskjold gravely. You're not serious about this, are you? Do I look as if I'm joking? But this is preposterous. Any more preposterous than Directive 10-289. It's not real or possible. Is only evil real and possible? But are you thinking that death and taxes are our only certainty, Mr. Reardon? Well, there's nothing I can do about the first. But if I lift the burden of the second, men might learn to see the connection between the two and what a longer, happier life they have the power to achieve. They might learn to hold not death and taxes, but life and production as their two absolutes and as the base of their moral code.
So Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin is believed to be dead following the crash of a private jet in Russia's Tver Oblast. So Russian authorities told the media that Prigozhin was listed as a passenger of the plane and that all 10 people who were on board were killed in the crash. Russia's emergency ministry told TASS that the plane was flying from Moscow headed to St. Petersburg. Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency said, quote, an investigation of the Embraer plane crash that happened in the Tver region this evening was initiated. According to the passenger list, first and last name of Yevgeny Prigozhin was included in this list, end quote. So there's a video circulating on social media that appears to show a plane falling from the sky. Well, it does show a plane falling from the sky, and they're saying that this is the video of this plane. And, you know, it's not just on Twitter and Telegram. It's also been posted on Russian media websites and stuff. So it's possible that this is it. And, you know, you could see this plane just drop. And there's another video that apparently they say shows the aftermath. And looking at it, you know, it doesn't look like anybody could have survived this crash. It's a pretty devastating scene. So, you know, definitely doesn't seem like there's any survivors. So National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Tuesday that the U.S. has expressed to Ukraine and European allies that Congress will back the new spending on the war in Ukraine that President Biden has requested, despite dissonant voices among Republicans. So an ambassador from a European country confirmed to Axios that his government had received this message from the U.S. in recent days. Sullivan noted in his comments that there are still strong voices in leadership positions in the Republican Party in Congress who favor continuing to fund the proxy war against Russia. And I think he's right, unfortunately. But what's interesting here is that a House GOP leadership aide told Axios that the new Ukraine spending would likely pass if brought to a vote, which I think that's, certain. I think, every Democrat would probably vote for it and enough Republicans would vote for it. But this aide is saying that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy might have difficulty bringing it to the floor for a vote due to growing opposition. And I'm not sure, I got to ask people that are more familiar with this exactly how the legislative procedures work, but I know that there are powers that Republicans have that they could block things from being brought to the floor. I don't know if they could block it outright, or I know they could definitely delay things for a while and make it difficult. So, we might see that, and I think that's good at least. So this aide said, quote, "I just don't see that support in the House Republican conference now. We are well beyond just the Freedom Caucus talking about this," end quote. So the Chinese Coast Guard said on Tuesday it allowed Philippine vessels to resupply a grounded Philippine warship on 2nd Thomas Shoal, which is a reef in the disputed Spratly Islands of the South China Sea. So a spokesman for the Chinese Coast Guard said that a temporary special arrangement was allowed because the Philippine vessels were not carrying illegal construction materials. He said that before allowing the Philippine vessels to resupply the BRP Sierra, that the Chinese Coast Guard issued a stern warning. So the Philippines grounded this ship, and that's the name of it, the BRP Sierra Madre. They grounded it on 2nd Thomas Shoal in 1999 to assert its claims, and they use a vessel as a base of operations. China had been blocking the resupply missions. There was an incident 3 weeks ago where China fired a water cannon. Manila rejected China's framing of the incident that occurred near the disputed shoal on Tuesday. They said that they managed to supply the ship despite harassment from Chinese vessels. Another one from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. So the BRICS summit is this week, and BRICS nations announced their intention to expand their group during a summit in South Africa. China seeks to grow BRICS to be a peer with the Group of Seven, the G7. So speaking at the summit in South Africa on Wednesday, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi signaled that BRICS was prepared to add new members. And this is a big deal because BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, India is kind of different than, what they have different ideas than what China does. And there were rumors and reports saying that India did not want to expand BRICS because India is also trying to, expand ties with the U.S. They're kind of playing both sides. But now they're saying that they agreed to expand it, and all the other leaders agreed with that. So this is significant, and Brazil says that they want to bring Argentina in. That's a country that they're eyeing to bring into this. And they also say that they're going to increase trade with their own currencies. So they're eyeing de-dollarization, which of course is a threat to the U.S. grip on the global financial and economic system, and just a threat to U.S. global dominance in general. So this is, of course, all accelerating, in the wake of the invasion, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the Western sanctions, the U.S. and Western sanctions that have followed, and just sanctions in general. In recent years, the U.S. has just been sanctioned crazy, and all these countries that are being targeted with sanctions naturally will increase cooperation. And again, India is a very interesting case because if you remember at the beginning of the war, they weren't going along with the sanctions. They're buying a ton of Russian oil now, and there were some threats. U.S. officials were threatening sanctions on India. But they realized, India is too important in their strategy against China, so they backed down. So they're kind of letting India do what they want. India buys a lot of Russian weapons because they want them as an ally against China. And then you have China and India are both in BRICS. So again, it's just kind of an interesting dynamic. Donald Trump he privately met with his top economic advisors last week and discussed plans for major tariff increases. 3 people familiar with the matter told the Washington Post. So one of the ideas which was floated involves a universal baseline tariff on nearly all imports to the U.S., which may be as high as 10%. So that's pretty big. The current baseline is around 3%. China's tariffs, the ones that Trump imposed that Biden has kept on, most of them face an average duty of around 19%. So in general, he wants to increase tariffs across the board. And
here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Nothing is more destructive of human decency. Nothing is less fruitful in seeking truth Nothing is more totalitarian, and nothing so undermines the government's own case as its use of torture. Oh, you're talking about those dirty commies over there in Russia and China, those people that torture people, whoever they want, for whatever reason? Why, those dirty commies? We should destroy them.
Of course, I'm talking about the American CIA and the American military torturing people at so-called black sites in Thailand, Afghanistan, Poland, and at the United States Naval Base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, which came to a head last week when a military judge did the unthinkable to the military and suppressed confessions that were given during and after torture. This is the first time the government has suffered a setback of this magnitude in 20 years at Guantanamo Bay. Second thing that happened last week was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of 9/11, as to whose guilt there is ample evidence, but who was tortured 183 times in 6 months. After his lawyers announced to the court that they were going to call his now retired CIA torturers to the witness stand to describe what they did to him, the prosecutor said, "You really want this stuff out there? We can't defend it. Lawyers are not ethically permitted to defend torture." So Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who arguably organized the murder of 3,000 Americans, escapes the death penalty and escapes the bowels of Florence, Colorado. That's the American government's supermax, and is now negotiating for a guilty plea with the creature comforts in an above-ground jail. So you have two major setbacks. Why? Because the government shot itself in the foot by torturing. It didn't need to torture Nashiri, the guy who allegedly bombed the USS Cole that killed 17,000 people. That's the confessions that were suppressed. And it didn't need to torture Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. But because it tortured both, in one case now they have no evidence out of his mouth with which to prosecute him. In the case of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, notwithstanding a mountain of evidence, literally a mountain of evidence, they're afraid to prosecute him because they don't want the American government to be exposed for what it truly is. So Joe Biden, and this is not Biden's fault, this just happened on his watch. The torture occurred on George W.'s watch. Joe Biden has authorized plea negotiations between the government and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Did you see either of those on the front page of the New York Times or on Fox News?
No. This is the George Bush that said we got to invade Afghanistan because we got to get that guy Osama bin Laden, quote, dead or alive.
Correct. And this is the same George Bush who in an unguarded moment said, well, we have to get Saddam Hussein because, quote, he tried to kill my daddy, close quote, which is true. He did try and kill President George H.W. Bush. That's hardly a reason for invading the country. A sickened individual who added trillions to debt, who slaughtered close to 1 million people in the two wars, who boasted about the Patriot Act, assaulting our civil liberties, arguably the worst president in the post-World War II era.
What you just said about him, how many people did he murder?
Well, close to 1 million people died between the Afghan war. We were there for 20 years. We accomplished nothing but destroying a society, and the invasion of Iraq, which we effectively destroyed. Close to 1 million human beings died, not Americans. Only about 6,000 or 7,000 Americans died.
So people get angry at me because they don't like my language. They don't like when I get angry. Why don't you calm down, Celente, and stop calling these people these names that you call them, because you are being, we don't like your language. Oh, yeah. And you don't like my attitude, but you bend over and suck the crap spewing out of the mouth of these murderers. Oh, and they're elevated by the media. Oh, yeah. Oh, why don't you buy some of little Georgie Bush's paintings? This is disgusting what's happened to this country. And what you write here, about, one of my lines is, I'm tired. Oh, first of all, you said that the black sites, you called them, right?
Yes.
That's being racist. How dare you call them black sites? Right. Let's really be stupid about this. So let's staying on the stupid level. I'm sick and tired of hearing this crap that if only women were in charge, there would be no war. And you write about this woman in the CIA about torture?
Gina Haspel, nicknamed by her colleagues, not her victims, by her colleagues, Bloody Gina, who gloried in the torture, who personally supervised the torture of al-Nashiri and who wrote about it in graphic detail, which was inadvertently revealed by a super honest FBI agent who didn't know what she was doing, I guess, inadvertently revealed this stuff in open court. And that's how we all got our hands on it. And she eventually became the director of the CIA under Donald Trump.
Yeah.
No, these people are never punished. Madeleine Albright went to her grave comfortable and confident in repeating the monstrosities that she uttered about the value of the slaughter of innocents. I mean, Bill Clinton famously bombed a pharmaceutical factory within hours of his public interrogation before a grand jury in order to get the public's attention off the interrogation of the grand jury. And people got killed. Obviously, people were working in the factory in Kosovo, but nobody gets punished for that, Gerald.
The Peter Schiff Show.
And I've been talking about the fact that we've been in a manufacturing recession for a long time. And that's where Joe Biden and Donald Trump have something in common, because both presidents lied about the true state of manufacturing. President Trump claimed that he revitalized manufacturing and made America great again by restoring our manufacturing prowess. And now Joe Biden is telling the same lie, that we're having this renaissance in manufacturing, that it's booming. And both presidents were being dishonest. Manufacturing was deteriorating under both of their presidencies, and it continues as we become more and more reliant on imports. It's the foreign factories that are producing the stuff that we consume, not the American factories. And so as soon as that weaker than expected data came out, the bond market rallied. Now, why did the bond market rally? Well, the economy is weak. Well, we already know that. But this weak economic data comes out, and traders buy bonds because that's what they've been programmed to do. It's like Pavlov and the dog, right? They salivate at these numbers, and they react. The idea is, the economy is weaker. The Fed doesn't have to hike as much. The Fed might have to cut. Well, how many times are you going to react to the same data set? But we got it, and bonds were on the lows. I mean, they had been beaten up pretty bad. So I'm sure some of the longs, or the shorts rather, in the bond market decided to take some profits, and that's probably what kind of drove the movement. But the theory is wrong, and I've been discussing that on this podcast. A weak economy is not good for bonds. The idea is that it just means that the Fed is going to be easier, but that just means that inflation is going to be stronger. The real enemy of bonds is inflation, especially U.S. Treasuries, where it's not really default that is your risk, but devaluation, depreciation. Inflation is what drives down the value of the dollar, and that drives down the value of bonds. Again, too much money chasing too few goods, that's what causes prices to go up. Well, if manufacturing is going down, what does that tell you about the supply of goods? Well, it's going down too, or not going up as much as we need it. So you're shrinking the goods that are available to be bought. That means goods prices should go up. At the same time, if the economy really is weakening, the government is ultimately going to run bigger deficits. The Fed's going to have to monetize those deficits. I mean, they're not going to have to, but they will, because if they don't, well, everything's going to collapse. And so we already know that given the choice between allowing a financial crisis or any kind of crisis to happen, or printing money, that's what they're going to do. They're going to print money. They're going to create inflation because they think that's the lesser of the two evils, and they have the ability to use that as their kind of, get out of jail free card, except it's not free. It's actually very expensive, but that's what these politicians do. And so a weakening economy leads to bigger deficits. It leads to ultimately a weaker dollar and, more money printing, and you have more people who are unemployed and not being productive, but taking their unemployment checks or their savings and trying to buy goods and services that they don't help create or produce. And you have more money chasing fewer goods. And so this is inflationary. But in the short run, the markets don't get that. So you got the rally in the bond market, and that kind of was like a domino. Gold rallied about $20. Again, why? Weak economy means the Fed can cut rates. They think that's bullish for gold. Gold went up. What's bullish for gold is the inflation. That's why this number was bullish for gold, because it means more inflation, not less. It should have been bearish for bonds too, but the bond traders don't get that. But gold was up about $20. In fact, it's up another $5 or so this evening as I'm doing this podcast. We're now at about 1,920. So we were below 1,900 this morning. And so now we're back above that level. Again, I've been saying on this podcast, that's the support. Anything below 1,900 is a pretty strong buy. so far anything near 2,000 has been a pretty good sell. But I think eventually it's the resistance at 2,000 that's going to give way, not the support at 1,900. In fact, I think the support is getting stronger as the resistance overhead is getting weaker. So the gold market went up. Dollar, didn't really make much of a move today. A little bit surprised by that. But the other person that was being attacked was Vivek Ramaswamy. But he's clearly the biggest outsider in this race. And one of the things that they're trying to say about him as well, you don't have any experience. What kind of experience do you have? I mean, you've never been in elected office. As far as I'm concerned, that's a plus. Because all these career politicians, they got plenty of experience, the exact kind of experience we don't want, right? They have experience running up the debt, spending money, right? That's their experience. None of these career politicians did anything because the country is a disaster. I mean, they wanted to criticize the Biden economy, and obviously they're Republicans and Biden's a Democrat, but the economy didn't just get bad under Biden. It wasn't great under Trump either, as much as they want to pretend that it was. We've been in a decline for a long time. And both parties have blood on their hands as far as who's, been bludgeoning it to death. But Vivek Ramaswamy, he doesn't have any experience in Washington. And that's precisely why sending him to Washington makes more sense than sending these guys back to repeat the mistakes that they've already made. And Ramaswamy, again, his heart's in the right place. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says. There's a lot of things that he says that I agree with. And in some cases, he's right about stuff, but not precisely for the right reasons. But he's on the right track. He understands, like Ronald Reagan, that the government is the problem, not the solution. The solution to the problem is getting rid of government, right? Limiting the size of government. He wants to do that. He wants to make government a lot smaller. He wants to cut spending. He wants to eliminate agencies and departments, and that's good. That's a positive thing. So people are criticizing this guy because he doesn't have enough experience. That's the best thing about him. He doesn't have experience wrecking the country.
We talked yesterday about Chris Christie and how he said, oh, Trump's a coward for not coming on and debating with us. Well, as usual, Chris Christie's political antennae are broken. And he was wrong because while they were, blathering about, let's put on that first clip, here's what was happening in the real world, i.e. the world of former Twitter, now X. And I just clipped this a little bit before the show started. 197.3 million views of Tucker Carlson interviewing President Trump in his little cabin, whatever it was. The most watched interview in the history of the world thus far. So sorry, Chris Christie, you got that wrong as usual. Trump felt like he didn't need to go on cable TV. He recognizes there are alternatives, and it turns out that his choice, of course, was the right choice in terms of reaching millions and millions of people.
In a way, Trump could look at it in a practical sense. Well, if I go there, are they going to change my opinion? If I go there, am I going to change their opinion?
Yeah.
Are they going to hate me less because I go there, or will they respect me more? And after what he's had to go through in the last couple of years, obviously, when you can get an audience like that, why bother? Why bother going there and playing those games? Because very much they are games that they play, and I think the part that annoys me the most, and yet this is what the people watch the most, is the yelling and shouting and so-called fighting. I've never got a big kick out of that because I don't think it accomplishes anything.
This is how things are changing, I think. A great progressive like Glenn, a maverick conservative like Gates talking about it. And what are they saying? They're saying, what on earth is going on? Poll after poll, and we talked about it so many times on the show, poll after poll shows that Americans, especially Republicans, especially conservatives, want nothing more to do with Ukraine, full stop. So why are these candidates up here saying we need to do more for Ukraine? And Gates comes in, well, why is Congress ignoring the will of the American people saying we need to do more for Ukraine? I think that was a great segment.
We've talked recently about the collusion between government and social media, but I think the collusion also goes to, cable, where they're going to spout a lot of government position. You take the war issue, for instance, and the welfare issue, and the Federal Reserve issue. They're not going to do it. This is why what's happening now with Twitter is very interesting. And thank goodness we still have enough freedom to find an alternative outlet. That doesn't mean we should be, casual about it and not think about it, because I think there will always, be a threat to this, because the people who are in charge of authoritarian government, they cannot stand the truth and they cannot stand competition. But so far, truth is winning a battle here and there.
Well, it wasn't only pandering on Ukraine that the Republicans did in their debate. There's also pandering on that same old thing, which is Israel. Let's put up that next clip. This is really interesting because this is a clip from it. We're not going to play the audio of it, but this is Nikki Haley. She says, "It's not that Israel needs America. America needs Israel." And then Citizen Free Press says Nikki Haley is America last, to which Matt Walsh, who writes for the Daily Wire, which has been very friendly to Israel, obviously, he says this is an insane thing for a presidential candidate to say. The very definition of America last. And it's interesting because, she's attacking Ramaswamy, who basically, I think, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but was taking more what I would consider a Ron Paul view, which is we should treat Israel like every other country. We don't need to send it billions. Treat it like a grown-up, the grown-up that it is, and let them do their own thing. Don't push them around, and don't send them a check. And, of course, everyone flipped out. But, this is nothing new. I remember back in '96 when Netanyahu first won. Now, he was a real maverick back then, and that was one of the planks in his platform. And I go back, I might be wrong slightly on the year, but I remember him saying, we don't want to have these strings attached to us by the U.S. We want to do our own thing. So it's nothing radical. It's nothing anti-Israel to say this, but Nikki Haley acted as if Ramaswamy just, I don't know, burned an Israeli flag or something.
Yeah, and to me, the principle of trading with people and having a relationship with them, why can't that be with everybody other than those who, the extremists are starting bombing you for some reason? There's always an end point. But for that part, and besides, there's no part of our Constitution that spelled it out the proper way. You take money from poor people in this country and give it to rich people around the world to fight their wars, and it hardly ever helps anybody except some of our corporate interests. The military-industrial complex. Just think of the Ukraine war. Has it really helped the Ukrainians? 400,000 killed, and it's the center of a world conflict right now that could get much worse. So this to me makes no sense whatsoever. So if you try to visualize, well, what would it be like if there was no empire like America to solve all these problems? Well, it's the empire that drives this thing. I think that's one of the things that especially some of the hockey, especially the strong hawks, is sort of a patriotic thing, that if you don't do it, I recall that when I was involved more directly in this, that not supporting the wars meant you were unpatriotic in some way, and you weren't supporting the troops, you weren't supporting the taxpayers, you weren't supporting the area of peace, and you've given up and have used all those wonderful reasons why you should have your blinders on, don't even think about it, continue with this aggravation and fighting that was liable to get out of hand. And right now, we're still on the verge of that. So I hope that between now and the election, there's a lot more common sense. Truth will win out. It just have to protect it and guide it. But that is the thing that the authoritarians hate the most. In an empire, truth becomes treasonous. So they rewrite the rules, and they continue to do that. But they cannot rewrite eternal rules. And I don't believe they can destroy all efforts by all people seeking and understanding what truth is really about, no matter how many times they recite their rituals.
Yeah.
Reardon looked at him, not smiling. The tall, slim figure, with the windbreaker stressing its trained, muscular agility, was that of a highwayman. The stern marble face was that of a judge. The dry, clear voice was that of an efficient bookkeeper. The looters are not the only ones who have kept records on you, Mr. Reardon. So have I. I have in my files copies of all your income tax returns for the last 12 years, as well as the returns of all my other clients. I have friends in some astonishing places who obtain the copies I need. I divide the money among my clients in proportion to the sums extorted from them. Most of my accounts have now been paid to their owners. Yours is the largest one left to settle. On the day when you will be ready to claim it, the day when I'll know that no penny of it will go back to support the looters, I will turn your account over to you. Until then, he glanced down at the gold on the ground. Pick it up, Mr. Reardon. It's not stolen. It's yours. Reardon would not move, or answer, or look down. Much more than that lies in the bank, in your name. What bank? Do you remember Midas Mulligan of Chicago? Yes, of course. All my accounts are deposited at the Mulligan Bank. There is no Mulligan Bank in Chicago. It is not in Chicago. Reardon let a moment pass. Where is it? I think that you will know it before long, Mr. Reardon, but I cannot tell you now. He added, I must tell you, however, that I am the only one responsible for this undertaking. It is my own personal mission. No one is involved in it but me and the men of my ship's crew. Even my banker has no part in it, except for keeping the money I deposit. Many of my friends do not approve of the course I've chosen, but we all choose different ways to fight the same battle, and this is mine." Reardon smiled contemptuously. "Aren't you one of those damn altruists who spends his time on a non-profit venture and risks his life merely to serve others?" "No, Mr. Reardon. I am investing my time in my own future. When we are free and have to start rebuilding from out of the ruins, I want to see the world reborn as fast as possible. If there is, then, some working capital in the right hands, in the hands of our best, our most productive men, it will save years for the rest of us, and, incidentally, centuries for the history of the country. Did you ask what you meant to me? Everything I admire, everything I want to be on the day when the earth will have a place for such state of being, everything I want to deal with, even if this is the only way I can deal with you and be of use to you at present." "Why?" whispered Reardon. "Because my only love, the only value I care to live for, is that which has never been loved by the world, has never won recognition or friends or defenders. Human ability. That is the love I am serving, and if I should lose my life, to what better purpose could I give it?" The man who had lost the capacity to feel, thought Reardon, and knew that the austerity of the marble face was the form of a disciplined capacity to feel too deeply. The even voice was continuing dispassionately. "I wanted you to know this. I wanted you to know it now, when it must seem to you that you're abandoned at the bottom of a pit among subhuman creatures who are all that's left of mankind. I wanted you to know, in your most hopeless hour, that the day of deliverance is much closer than you think. And there was one special reason why I had to speak to you and tell you my secret ahead of the proper time. Have you heard of what happened to Orrin Boyle's steel mills on the coast of Maine?" "Yes," said Reardon, and was shocked to hear that the word came as a gasp out of the sudden jolt of eagerness within him. "I didn't know whether it was true." "It's true. I did it. Mr. Boyle is not going to manufacture Reardon metal on the coast of Maine. He is not going to manufacture it anywhere. Neither is any other looting louse who thinks that a directive can give him a right to your brain. Whoever attempts to produce that metal will find his furnaces blown up, his machinery blasted, his shipments wrecked, his plant set on fire. So many things will happen to any man who tries it that people will say there's a curse on it, and there will soon be no worker in the country willing to enter the plant of any new producer of Reardon metal. If men like Boyle think that force is all they need to rob their betters, let them see what happens when one of their betters chooses to resort to force. I wanted you to know, Mr. Reardon, that none of them will produce your metal, nor make a penny on it." Because he felt an exultant desire to laugh, as he had laughed at the news of Wyatt's fire, as he had laughed at the crash of Danconia Copper, and knew that if he did, the thing he feared would hold him, would not release him this time, and he would never see his mills again. Reardon drew back and, for a moment, kept his lips closed tight to utter no sound. When the moment was over, he said quietly, his voice firm and dead, "Take that gold of yours and get away from here."
So, a U.S. official told the New York Times on Thursday that the Pentagon will begin training Ukrainian pilots on F-16 fighter jets inside the United States, and that could start as early as September. The U.S. initially said that the training would only be conducted in Europe unless the countries leading it, the Netherlands and Denmark, reached capacity. So, this whole time since President Biden gave the green light for this whole F-16 plan back in May, the U.S. was saying that the Europeans were taking the lead. They got it covered. Don't worry about it. But earlier this week, Sabrina Singh, she's a Pentagon spokeswoman, she said that the U.S. was open to training Ukrainian pilots if these countries were at capacity and if they couldn't train as many pilots as the Ukrainians wanted. So it looks like that's what happened here, because as I've been covering lately, there's been all these reports saying, the training in Europe, they're only going to start with 6 Ukrainian pilots, and that's going to take 10 months to get them done, and then the next batch won't be done until 6 months after that. So the Ukrainians, I'm sure, were not happy with that, and the U.S. trying to make them happy is now going to start this training program inside the United States. And they've done other trainings for Ukrainians inside the U.S. I know there's been some general training, but they also train them on the Patriot missile systems inside the United States. So this U.S. official said that the training would start with English lessons in Texas, followed by months of flying lessons in Arizona. So earlier this year, the Air Force concluded that at least some Ukrainian pilots could learn to operate F-16s within 4 to 5 months. But it's not clear how long the full training process will take inside the United States. Even if, say, the training in the U.S. only takes 4 months, which I doubt it'll be that quick, that means Ukrainians still are not getting these planes, not getting their first F-16s until next year. And so far, the Netherlands and Denmark are the only 2 countries that have pledged they will give F-16s to Ukraine. But I'm sure, especially seeing this, and this is another thing I've suspected, that the U.S. is probably going to end up giving them F-16s as well. They just haven't announced it yet, but they also haven't ruled it out. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said on Wednesday night that he would send the military into Mexico to fight drug cartels on day 1 of his presidency if he wins the 2024 presidential election. So this was at the Republican presidential debate in Milwaukee. DeSantis was asked if he would support sending in U.S. Special Forces to take out fentanyl labs and other drug operations inside Mexico. And he said very enthusiastically, he said yes, and that he would do it on day 1. He said, quote, "We have to reestablish the rule of law, and we have to defend our people. The President of the United States has got to use all available powers as Commander-in-Chief to protect our country," end quote. He also claimed that cartels are killing tens of thousands of our fellow citizens, and he's referring to drug overdoses there. And he said that he would treat them as a foreign terrorist organization. So taking military action across the border would dramatically expand the decades-old failed war on drugs, but this idea is becoming, the idea of invading or bombing Mexico in response to the large number of overdoses in the United States is becoming increasingly popular among Republicans. Other 2024 hopefuls have called for military action against cartels, including the frontrunner, former President Trump. They want to bomb away, this problem. And earlier this year, Senators Lindsey Graham and John Kennedy introduced a bill to designate Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, and that bill has a total of 6 co-sponsors. And Graham said that the purpose of this legislation was to set the stage for military intervention in Mexico. So, and this other bill that was introduced also this year was introduced by Dan Crenshaw in the House, and he's a total neocon Republican from Texas. And his bill would authorize the president to use military force. It's an AUMF. And it's very open-ended. You could interpret this in a lot of ways. I'll read what the bill says. It would give the president the authorization to use force against, quote, "those responsible for trafficking fentanyl or a fentanyl-related substance into the United States or carrying out other related activities that cause regional destabilization in the Western Hemisphere," end quote. So that could be used for all sorts of things. And a lot of times, they blame China for the fentanyl. So, who knows how far that AUMF could go. So that was introduced. I doubt that it's going to come up for a vote this year, but again, it's just becoming increasingly more popular, this idea. Crenshaw's bill has 21 co-sponsors. And what's unfortunate is that a lot of the Republicans that are calling for this, that are co-sponsoring this type of legislation, not Crenshaw and Graham, obviously, they're total warmongers, but a lot of the other ones are, some of the more, America First type Republicans who think we should not be involved in Ukraine. They support this. So it's just not good. So BRICS has invited 6 new members to join the bloc in the most dramatic expansion since it was formed. And this was announced by South Africa's president on Thursday, which was the last day of BRICS 3-day summit in South Africa. So Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, Argentina, Egypt, and Ethiopia were invited to join BRICS as full members starting in 2024. The admission of the nations will more than double the size of BRICS, which is currently 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The 5 BRICS nations account for over 40% of the world's population, and the bloc is viewed as a counterweight to the U.S.-led global economic order. The list of invitees is significant because it includes some U.S. allies, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Egypt gets a few $1 billion in military aid from the U.S. each year. And it also includes Iran, which is a heavily sanctioned country. So U.S. sanctions have spurred the growth of an alternate global financial system and de-dollarization efforts, especially in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia has found new markets for its oil in India and China since the U.S.-led Western sanctions campaign cut off most energy exports to Europe. But this didn't start with the Russian invasion, with the sanctions on Russia. This was building for years as the U.S. was getting more sanctions happy, putting all these countries under blockades like Iran, Venezuela, Syria, creating this alternate market. And, as China's facing sanctions from the U.S., obviously not as bad as those other countries because our economies are so intertwined still. But it's just, this is just the obvious result of the U.S. just trying to bully everybody.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Last year, November 2022, we said the S&P 500 would go up at least 16%, because that's what it did following 40 U.S. midterm elections. And it did. It went up to about over 17%. And when it hit that, we said, that's it. Finito. Numbers are there. It's going to start going down. And it has, as well as the markets. So what happened in the markets today? Stocks fell sharply Thursday after a tech rally sparked by stronger than expected NVIDIA results were short-lived. The Dow Jones average fell nearly 374 points. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ had their biggest one-day loss since August 2nd. Dollar Tree was the worst performing stock in the S&P 500, losing nearly 13% on disappointing third quarter guidance. Shares of Nike shed 1.1%, extending their losing streak. Okay? How about Foot Locker? How about Macy's? One after another. We've been warning about this. They're also blaming rising crime. Dollar Tree adding lock cases, removing items from stores amid rising theft costs. It did not happen before the COVID war. And people say, watch your language, when these little fucking bastards and bitches locked down everything and made up bullshit fucking crap to stay in your house, close your business, and your life is destroyed. They destroyed the world in ways that are incalculable with this COVID war. And now the cheap money is running out. And as we said, when summertime ends in the Northern Hemisphere, a different trip is going to come, because every night right now, people are in a summer state of mind. They don't have a fucking clue about the banks being degraded. What's a Fitch? Who's a Moody? Oh, you're in a Moody. Oh, we're the bankster gangsters that a scumbag bastard, may he rot in hell, Woodrow Wilson, who gave us World War I, the Federal Reserve, and income tax created. Yeah, the bankster bandits. They're meeting in Jackson Hole. So here's the deal. They're putting out the word that they may raise interest rates another 25 basis points. If they do, it's dead, because it's a very simple game. The money is not going into IPOs. It's not going into equities. It's going into treasuries and money market funds that are paying like over 5% and no risk. The typical 30-year fixed mortgage rate is at 7.31%. That's the highest since 2000. We got jerks and morons that created this crisis with their COVID lockdown, destroying the economy, and artificially pumping it up with record low interest rates, where you have the record low mortgages, the housing boom, and the equity market boom. And the head of the Wagner Group, bye-bye, died in an airplane accident. And they say, well, did he really die? You're not going to see the cat again if he's still alive, so he's as good as dead. And Putin said, I've known Prigozhin for a long time, since the early 90s. Talented businessman with a complicated fate who made serious mistakes in his life. Remember the coup that they tried that didn't go very far? And Putin said, don't worry about it. It's all right. We're still friends. Yeah. Hey, don't worry about it. Gone. And Putin also said, attempts by the West to maintain its hegemony were the key cause of the conflict in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed at the BRICS group nation, where he rejected the idea of exceptionalism. Quote, we are against any hegemony. The notion of exceptionalism promoted by some nations and the policy of neocolonialism is derived from that claim. Exceptionalism. Remember who was selling the exceptionalism line? The Nobel Peace of Crap Prize winner. So here's the clip of the guy selling exceptionalism.
But what makes us exceptional is not our ability to flout international norms and the rule of law. It is our willingness to affirm them through our actions. A lot of people talk about American exceptionalism. I'm a firm believer in American exceptionalism. You know why I am? It's because of folks like this. It's because we don't run and hide when there's a problem. It's because we don't react to our fears, but instead We respond with common sense and skill and courage. That's the best of our history. Not fear, not hysteria, not misinformation. We react clearly and firmly even when others are losing their heads.
That is bullshit. Bullshit.
Obama. Obama bullshit. Yeah. You're a murderer. Look how many countries you got into. Fear and hysteria, that's all they sell. Oh, misinformation? You mean the bullshit that the government throws out? And if you don't swallow it and believe something else, it's misinformation? And that's what Putin's talking about. Who the fuck are you to call America exceptional? Exceptionalism. What's your favorite war, Obama? The Vietnam War? No, I like the Korean War. No, the first Iraq War. Oh, the Afghan War was a lot better. I love the Iraq War. And I got rid of Gaddafi. And I want to get rid of Assad.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Using different words to describe evil doesn't make it not evil anymore. So that's the short version.
As you say, the terminology scares people, but all it really boils down to is that everybody should be bound by the same moral rules. And if you put it that way, well, almost everybody accepts it.
Yeah. They don't even notice that they have in their brain an exception for this thing called authority. It's like, well, of course, morality applies to everybody and nobody should do this, nobody should do that. Like, well, what about when they legislate it and call it taxation? Well, we need that. Like, they don't even notice in their own belief system that they have this compartment, which is 100% of a result of them being taught to believe this. They have this compartment that says, well, those people, when they do these weird rituals and scribbles and call it legislation and stuff, not only is it okay for them to do it, but it's necessary for them to like rob the rest of us and violently dominate everybody. And so most people, I think, are voluntarists just naturally, but they have this big exception that they've always just accepted without question, which is, that's what I did until I looked more closely at it and said, but why does this not apply to those people over there who, like, we all know they're like the worst people in the world? Why would you give the worst people in the world an exemption from morality? That doesn't seem like it would lead to good things.
Yeah, and then so many of these folks, of whom I used to be one also, start making the same arguments the regime itself would make. They start echoing the arguments of their own oppressors, which is an indication of the ultimate victory for the other side. And there is some of that, by the way, reflected in this film, which I want to get to now. So it's Jones Plantation. When you're somebody like you who has written about big and important ideas, it must be very tempting to write the 40-page John Galt speech and have one of the characters deliver it. You resisted that temptation.
Not entirely. I partially resisted it. And then the reason there's a director who knows how to direct is it's his job to say, that's awesome, make it about a third that long.
Yeah, okay.
And so even...
Well, I'll tell you what my favorite speech...
Okay.
We'll just put it this way. Again, I don't want to spoil too much. But somebody figures out the nature of this regime. That at its root, it's not really all that different from what it used to be. And he does his best to try to convey this truth to everybody. And he says, look, we're just choosing between two masters. This is not a real choice. And nobody wants to hear it. You think, oh my gosh, it's speaking right to me.
Yeah. And that speech started longer, but that's one of those things where we did whittle it down. J.J. Green is the actor who plays that guy. And he only got the final version of that speech the day we filmed that. There were a lot of the whole filming was just a circus. The number of miracles we had to pull off. It was a 17-day shoot for an entire movie. And he just did an awesome job of delivering that. But that's, it's one example of many where it's like, we have to shorten it and chop it down and get it down to just the bare essentials because we can't push our luck with people's attention span and we can't have a 4-hour movie. So, and he did an awesome job at being that character.
Did you have any concerns that what we might call a woke audience would be unhappy, that they would say you had appropriated the experiences of American slaves in order to make your crazy libertarian points and that that's not allowed?
People are going to do that. And the funny thing is, these days, so many people are like so on edge and careful about like, oh, you can't say anything that can be misconstrued. Like they can misconstrue anything they want. And because I would only allow a director to do this who was on the same page with the message and everything. And so the first part of the answer is we just don't care if somebody's going to go, I'm offended because blah, 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 blah. But to address it more directly, I actually recently did a video series based on the works of Frederick Douglass, who grew up as a slave. And he actually describes a number of things that are similar to what you see in the movie of mental control and mental enslavement. And people can fish for a reason to be offended if they feel like it. But because it's a fictional story, kind of, sort of, there's no, like, what's the actual complaint? Well, you made a point. Well, yeah, but I made a point by describing how reality works. If you don't like pointing to evil situations to demonstrate how evil actually accomplishes what evil accomplishes, that's your problem, not mine. And so if anybody like doesn't like me depicting these, take it up with Frederick Douglass, because he describes a lot of the same manipulations because they're universal. Like, yeah, the state of being of most Americans on a day-to-day physical level, obviously the suffering and injustice can't be compared in degree to chattel slavery, but the methods are the same. The mentality is the same. The manipulations are the same. They tweak it here and there and they change the details, but to not be able to understand how power-happy psychos play their game, I think that is the biggest challenge. And that was the goal of making the movie, is I want normal people to get a glimpse into how villains in real life actually do this stuff. Not cartoon villains, not comic book villains who cackle maniacally and wring their hands and just randomly do evil stuff for no apparent reason and are obviously evil. In real life, how do evil things happen? And I want people to watch this movie and go, holy smokes, not only is that believable, but I'm not sure I wouldn't have fallen for it if I wasn't there myself.
Okay, JonesPlantationFilm.com. All right. The subject of voting comes up, and that's very important because a lot of people in this day and age say that they're worried about democracy. And they talk about democracy and the sacred right to vote and this and that. And they think, I think many of them, that that's what makes a society free, is precisely this ability to choose who's going to run the show. And as usual, Larkin Rose comes along and pours cold water all over that.
Yeah, this movie hits that hard and hits it in a way that, like, again, because you're watching it in the setting of a fictional story, you can't not recognize that's a clever move for them to do that, for them to pretend they're free and let them choose between two oppressors and slave masters. And then you get the behind the scenes version of them discussing what they're actually accomplishing, what they're doing. So people can watch it and they can go, well, I don't think that's what's happening today. Okay, but do you recognize why that would totally be a clever and effective means in the setting of the story? And everybody has to go, yeah, that would work. That's a clever thing. And then you can try as hard as you want to pretend that that's not what they've done to you your whole life about democracy. But once someone has that picture rattling around inside their head, like, one of the things I most hope happens is people watch the movie and then the next time they see a political campaign ad, they go, oh, man.
Well, by the way, can I say,
we're right on the plantation.
Alex Jones kind of set the internet on fire, which he remarkably still has the ability to do, even though he's been kicked off like almost every single platform. Where he said that
they're locking you down. They're coming back to your homes. You're going to have to go back.
He claimed that he had insider information, that he had talked to some very high-level people at the TSA, and they had told him that by, I believe it was October, masks were coming back on planes, and then after that, to be prepared for like 2020-style COVID policies. Now, initially, I must say, I didn't put too much stock in this. Alex Jones, I know it's kind of popular in dissident circles these days to talk about what Alex Jones got right. And he objectively got a lot of things right that were fairly impressive. You know, like he was talking about like, you know, Epstein Island and stuff like that before anybody else was. Even the stuff about like the frogs turning gay, it turned out there was like some truth to that. And he's
I did it to me too.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's impossible to say for sure what turned Rob gay, but he wasn't always like this. You know, he wasn't always like this, and he is now. So something happened.
I blame the government.
I'm sure they had their hand in it. Some combination of government and big business. But anyway, the thing is that if you've followed Alex Jones a little bit more closely over the years, you also know that he's gotten a ton wrong. Alex Jones' method is kind of throwing things against the wall, and some of them stick. And I'm not taking away credit. Like, it's remarkable, some of the things that stick, but there's just a ton that he's predicted that just never comes true. And then everyone just kind of moves on from it. So I didn't put too much stock in this prediction. My thinking has kind of been like, there's just no way. There's no way they're going to try to go back to 2020 stuff, especially with a full year still to go till a presidential election. The American people are so over this. They're so much more aware of it than they were when COVID first came out. It would destroy the economy. No president wants to do that, you know, going into a re-election year. I didn't put much stock in it. However, since then, and this has only been a couple days, there does seem to be a lot of reporting about fear of COVID again, what we might have to do coming up in the future. And it's hard to look at it and not go, oof, you know, just after the last 3 years, I mean, what can you put past these people that they maybe they would do it again? I don't know. How are you feeling about this?
I think they'd love to do it again. I can't foresee that they could possibly get away with it. I just don't think people are going to go for it. It seems a little too far out from the election that they want everyone at home again to maybe try and pull some stunts. Also, unless they really messed up with the vaccine, that there are some odd changes to the actual virus, like it mutated in weird ways, or the vaccine has actually lowered immunity. I can't imagine we're going to be in a situation where it's so dangerous that we have to actually shut down. And I think people will see through it.
Never forget, they need propaganda. That's why they have propaganda campaigns, because they recognize that that's an important element to all of this. So without that, I don't know how it works.
And they also, they can't propagandize people to it can get back to normal, because we all did it. We went through the whole thing and we got back to normal by just going back to normal.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with their strategies at all. It had nothing to do with the lockdowns. I mean, we couldn't have more certifiably proven that every idea that they had and every authoritarian piece of power that they took to impose upon us, they were just wrong, start to finish.
Yep.
I don't see it like, I mean, maybe I'm just wrong and I'm too hopeful that people aren't absolutely retarded. Like maybe I think that they're just a little bit above that. And I also just think, I just don't see them possibly being able to spin it or sell it again. And that's not to say that they won't try, or maybe they're going to make a push to just try and sell the latest boosters for a short chunk of time. I don't see substantial shutdowns or mask wearing. I just don't think it will fly.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's the current, this guy currently sits on the Pfizer board. He used to be the head of the FDA. It's pretty incredible that you get to go back and forth between those two offices. Hell, you can even work at the NIH and be getting payments direct from these people. So it is pretty incredible, the revolving door that exists in the pharmaceutical industry. But here he is, and you would think that people would at least even just take issue with being able to go back and forth between those two positions. But here he is selling the latest booster.
For a look at some health concerns on the horizon as we approach the end of summer, including a rise in COVID cases and questions about updates to vaccines, we're joined now by former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He also sits on the board of Pfizer, and it's great to have you here in person.
Really is amazing, just even the way they introduce that.
Yeah, like both of those.
That sounds corrupt as shit.
But they smile through it like that's what makes them so credentialed. We have the expert here, the guy who is both the FDA person and the Pfizer person.
She goes, and here we have the head of Central Intelligence Command, who also owns Raytheon. So what's going on? You know, it's just unbelievable.
News we got Thursday. The CDC announced a highly mutated strain of COVID has just shown up in Michigan, BA 2.86. How concerned does the public need to be?
Well, right now, I've talked to a number of virologists who are usually pretty staid, and they're pretty concerned about this. Right now, it doesn't appear to be spreading widely. There's 7 strains that have been identified and sequenced in 5 different countries, so the UK, Denmark, Israel, and now in the US. We don't know whether or not this has been spreading quietly and we just didn't detect it, or it's something that's spreading very quickly. The concern is that when you look at these different strains that have been identified, they're genetically very similar. So that suggests that it's probably spreading simultaneously in multiple countries. Whether or not this is going to be more transmissible than what we've seen before, that's the key question. Certainly at this point, it doesn't appear more pathogenic, so it doesn't appear to be more dangerous, but it may be more
transmissible than the strains.
Yeah, let's pause it and break this down a little bit, because it's, go ahead, Rob.
This is a dream. So you got something that's less deadly and more transmissible. That means all these people that never had natural immunity, perhaps some of these boosters have actually worn off. They'll get this other thing, which is an even lesser degree of a cold, and then they'll have some degree of natural immunity. Sounds to me like we've got a good situation here.
Yeah, so here's the correct answer. Her question was, how worried should people be about this? And the correct answer is not at all. There's no reason to be worried at all. Even by what this guy is saying, there's no reason to be worried, okay? All indications suggest that these new variants are no more deadly and possibly more contagious. So it looks like the trend of less deadly and more contagious is continuing, which, by the way, is the positive trend. That's what we're hoping for this whole time. And luckily, fortunately, some of the kind of beauty of the way life all works is that it's also beneficial for viruses to evolve this way. The more contagious they are and the less deadly, then they have more hosts they can spread, and they don't end up killing their hosts before they can spread on. Also works out better for us. But the fact is that you're talking about strains now that are less deadly than the Omicron strain was. What you're talking about, if you're in terms of like, should people be worried? It's kind of like the same thing COVID always was, just to a much lesser degree. Yeah, if you're old and sick, very sick, and have never had COVID, maybe you should be a little concerned about this. For everyone else, if you're not sick and you've had COVID, you have nothing to worry about.
And there was a meeting with the people, Brits, and they have 5 countries that got together, Russia, China, India, South Africa, and another one more. And they're trying to compete with the dollar because they're sick and tired of our foreign policy and our economic policy, us throwing our weight around because we print the money and we dump it on them and that sort of thing. But it's been building and it's still building, so this is why BRICS exists. But they've concluded that meeting and they said that they're going to add 6 new countries to this. So that's a big deal. It doesn't mean that tomorrow all of a sudden the dollar is gone, because I don't think it's going to go that fast, but it's significant. I think it has historic significance that they're letting us know, more than just the organization that has not moved themselves to a truly alternative currency, but it's in the wind, and it will come eventually, not because they're going to be smart and have a perfect solution, but we're going to continue to undermine our dollar standard and our privilege we have usurped from the world, and that is managing the reserve currency of the world. Powell did make an announcement. Too much inflation out there. He didn't say this last years when interest rates were below 0, but now it's too much inflation. We're going to keep pounding away, and the way they solve inflation is to destroy the economy. economy, because they think prices go up in a healthy economy, but prices go up when the monetary growth is too much and the money is being devalued. But traditionally under Keynesian economics and interventionism, that when they print too much money and the reflection of that too much money pushes prices up, the only tool they have is, well, we have to ruin the economy, decrease production, and then the prices will come down. Well, I tell you what, if people are hurting and you decrease production, maybe the prices are still going to go up because they're trying to correct something they did for many, many years, especially in the last 10 years or so. So they made that announcement, and he says, nope, we're going to keep pounding away. We'll raise those interest rates that we have to, but eventually the market will dictate policy. If the Fed won't raise interest rates, and like right now we have pressure from the market to raise interest rates, so that will last. But regardless of what's happening in South Africa or in Wyoming, it's all harmful to the dollar, and it's all on the long term give stimulus to gold, and that's the reason I do work with and partner with Birch Gold Group.
I've been selling my soul, working all day, double time hours for bullshit pay, so I can sit out here, waste my life away, drag back home and drown my troubles away. It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me and people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is, Lord it is, living in the new world with an old soul. Rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just want to have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end, cause the rich men know the rich men. Wish politicians look out for minors, and not just minors on an island somewhere. Lord, we got kids in the street, ain't got nothing to eat, and the obese milking welfare. By God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds. Men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground, cause all this damn country does is keep on kicking them down. Lord, it's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me and people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is, Lord it is, living in the new world with an old soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just want to have total control. Want to know what you think, want to know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end, cause the rich men north of Richmond. I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay.
Is probably one of the most famous songs in the history of the country. I even listened to the song, and it was an enlightenment to me. Well, first there was a philosophic message, and that's what caught everybody's attention. But it was also the type of music that I don't listen to it now. It was sort of different. But what was great was there was a message in the music, and this is what has excited people. And it's been, 2 days of no advertisement, not dealing with any promoters or anything. It's skyrocketed to the top of the list, and there has to be something significant about that. Chris, what I'd like to do is boil it down to what is the big thing here? Why is it so popular? And my answer is the people are starved for truth, and there was some truth-telling in this song, and the people loved it. Chris.
That's right, Dr. Paul. And as you've said over the years, we do live in an empire of lies. Part of being an American is being constantly bombarded with propaganda. And Oliver Anthony just cut through it like lightning. He exposed the empire of lies. And in just the first few words, when I first heard it, I knew it was going to be good. I mean, you could feel the song, And as you mentioned, it shows what people in America really think, beyond all the lies and the propaganda. And millions and millions and millions have listened to it, I'm sure, many times, more than once. I listened to it more than once. And it shows, it's very encouraging that people are aware that they're not alone. They're not alone in their economic struggles. And in something that is very rare in music, it identifies the correct source of the problem. It's the rich men north of Richmond. That's Washington, and the dollar. We talk about the dollar on the show all the time. He's not talking, Oliver Anthony's not singing about Russia and China and North Korea and all the foreign countries that we're supposed to be constantly paying attention to. He's talking about the rich men north of Richmond. They're the ones that want total control, and millions of Americans get it. That's so encouraging as an American, because we always hear, people are sheep, people are sheep. Well, not everyone's a sheep. There a very substantial part of our nation knows that something is wrong, and Oliver Anthony pinpointed it with genius clarity, and this is very encouraging.
It reminds me of something Ronald Reagan told me. I was attending the Gold Commission report, and that would have been 1981. And there was an opportunity for me to fly with Reagan in the helicopter out to Andrews Air Force Base. And I did that, and it was a one-on-one conversation. And he knew I was coming from the Gold Commission. And he had always been known to be sympathetic to gold. But he knew I was sympathetic. So he told me, he says, there's never been a great country that went off its gold standard that remained great. That was pretty prophetic, because right now that is exactly what we talked about in the introduction, is the loss of a statement of a great country that drifted away from it. There were no restraints on them no restraints on printing and deceiving people about money and all the distortions that it causes, how it develops and creates the welfare warfare state. So I always remember that as being very prophetic, and that Gold Commission didn't accomplish very much, but one thing that happened, we started at least minting, which is a proper government function, minting gold and silver coins, which is supposed to be the only legal tender that we use. So step by step, in 1976, we also canceled out about 43 years of illegally owning gold. If you bought gold, it was illegal, and that was changed. So those things are happening, giving people more of a chance. Now, they'd like to cancel everybody who is going to tell the truth about the empire, but I tell you what, when it breaks loose, it's like a fire. They can't stop it.
I won't accept the help of a criminal. Daniskild's face showed no reaction. I cannot force you to accept the gold, Mr. Reardon, but I will not take it back. You may leave it lying where it is, if you wish. I don't want your help, and I don't intend to protect you. If I were within reach of a phone, I would call the police. I would, and I will, if you ever attempt to approach me again. I'll do it, in self-protection. I understand exactly what you mean. You know, because I've listened to you, because you've seen me eager to hear it, that I haven't damned you as I should. I can't damn you or anyone else. There are no standards left for men to live by, so I don't care to judge anything they do today or in what manner they attempt to endure the unendurable. If this is your manner, I will let you go to hell in your own way, but I want no part of it, neither as your inspiration nor as your accomplice. Don't expect me ever to accept your bank account, if it does exist. Spend it on some extra armor plate for yourself, because I'm going to report this to the police and give them every clue I can to set them on your trail. Daniskild did not move or answer. A freight train was rolling by, somewhere in the distance and darkness. They could not see it, but they heard the pounding beat of wheels filling the silence, and it seemed close, as if a disembodied train, reduced to a long string of sound, were going past them in the night. You wanted to help me in my most hopeless hour, said Reardon. If I am brought to where my only defender is a pirate, then I don't care to be defended any longer. You speak some remnant of a human language, so in the name of that I'll tell you that I have no hope left. But I have the knowledge that when the end comes, I will have lived by my own standards, even while I was the only one to whom they remained valid. I will have lived in the world in which I started, and I will go down with the last of it. I don't think you'll want to understand me, but... A beam of light hit them with the violence of a physical blow. The clangor of the train had swallowed the noise of the motor, and they had not heard the approach of the car that swept out of the side road from behind the farmhouse. They were not in the car's path, yet they heard the screech of brakes behind the two headlights, pulling an invisible shape to a stop. It was Reardon who jumped back involuntarily, and had time to marvel at his companion. The swiftness of Danaskiold's self-control was that he did not move. It was a police car, and it stopped beside them. The driver leaned out. "Oh, it's you, Mr. Reardon," he said, touching his fingers to his cap. "Good evening, sir." "Hello," said Reardon, fighting to control the unnatural abruptness of his voice. There were two patrolmen in the front seat of the car, and their faces had a tight look of purpose, not the look of their usual friendly intention to stop for a chat. "Mr. Reardon, did you walk from the mills by way of Edgewood Road, past Blacksmith Cove?" "Yes." "Why? Did you happen to see a man anywhere around these parts? A stranger moving along in a hurry?" "Where?" "He'd be either on foot or in a battered wreck of a car that's got $1 million motor." "What man?" "A tall man with blonde hair." "Who is he?" "You wouldn't believe it if I told you, Mr. Reardon. Did you see him?" Reardon was not aware of his own questions, only of the astonishing fact that he was able to force sounds past some beating barrier inside his throat. He was looking straight at the policeman, but he felt as if the focus of his eyes had switched to his side vision, and what he saw most clearly was Danaskiold's face watching him with no expression, with no lines, no muscles worth of feeling. He saw Danaskiold's arms hanging idly by his sides, the hands relaxed, with no sign of intention to reach for a weapon, leaving the tall, straight body defenseless and open as to a firing squad. He saw in the light that the face looked younger than he had thought, and that the eyes were sky blue. He felt that his one danger would be to glance directly at Danaskiold, and he kept his eyes on the policeman, on the brass buttons of a blue uniform, but the object filling his consciousness, more forcefully than a visual perception, was Danaskiold's body, the naked body under the clothes, the body that would be wiped out of existence. He did not hear his own words, because he kept hearing a single sentence in his mind, without context except the feeling that it was the only thing that mattered to him in the world. If I should lose my life, to what better purpose could I give it? "Did you see him, Mr. Reardon?" "No," said Reardon. "I didn't." The policeman shrugged regretfully and closed his hands about the steering wheel. "You didn't see any man that looked suspicious?" "No." "Nor any strange car passing you on the road?" "No." The policeman reached for the starter. "They got word that he was seen ashore in these parts tonight, and they've thrown a dragnet over 5 counties. We're not supposed to mention his name, not to scare the folks, but he's a man whose head is worth $3 million in rewards from all over the world." He had pressed the starter and the motor was churning the air with bright cracks of sound when the second policeman leaned forward. He had been looking at the blonde hair under Danaskiold's cap. "Who is that, Mr. Reardon?" he asked. "My new bodyguard," said Reardon. "Oh, a sensible precaution, Mr. Reardon, in times like these. Good night, sir." The motor jerked forward. The red taillights of the car went shrinking down the road. Danaskiold watched it go, then glanced pointedly at Reardon's right hand. Reardon realized that he had stood facing the policeman with his hand clutching the gun in his pocket, and that he had been prepared to use it. He opened his fingers and drew his hand out hastily. Danaskiold smiled. It was a smile of radiant amusement, the silent laughter of a clear young spirit greeting a moment it was glad to have lived. And although the two did not resemble each other, the smile made Reardon think of Francisco d'Anconia. "You haven't told a lie," said Ragnar Danaskiold. "Your bodyguard. That's what I am, and what I'll deserve to be, in many more ways than you can know at present. Thanks, Mr. Reardon, and so long. We'll meet again much sooner than I had hoped." He was gone before Reardon could answer. He vanished beyond the stone fence as abruptly and soundlessly as he had come. When Reardon turned to look through the farm field, there was no trace of him, and no sign of movement anywhere in the darkness. Reardon stood on the edge of an empty road in a spread of loneliness vaster than it had seemed before. Then he saw, lying at his feet, an object wrapped in burlap, with one corner exposed and glistening in the moonlight, the color of the pirate's hair. He bent, picked it up, and walked on.